Hello, and welcome to another TMRN, Time Monk Radio Network production. I'm McLaren, and today is Saturday, August 25th, 2012. Joining us today for a second conversation about consciousness is physicist Dr. Tom Campbell. Tom's scientific study of consciousness over many years led to him writing the three-book trilogy, My Big Toe. TOE is short for Theory of Everything. Consciousness exists beyond and transcends the physical material reality limited to the cluster of neurons in our brains and nerve cells extending throughout our bodies. Tom's website are mybigtoe.com and mbtevents.com. On the websites, you'll find his bookstore enabling access to Tom's writings and DVDs, internet links to video and audio of his prior presentations and interviews, and a section containing workshop and seminar slides. Tom has been the guest on numerous alternative media radio programs, and at YouTube there are many multimedia presentations also available. Tom's work is most fully described and developed in his book, My Big Toe. It introduces and explains his theory, scientifically based experimental support for the theory, and other aspects of his thinking and his message about consciousness. There is much more there than any of the multimedia modality can ever expound upon. Hello, Tom. Welcome back to Time Monk Radio.
Well, thank you very much. That was a very nice introduction. It's my pleasure to be here.
We're very much looking forward to this second conversation. The Time Monk Radio administrator is Fox, and today he'll be doing the recording and technical support of the show. Several members of the forum were kind enough to join us for this discussion. They include members Uranus Rising, Chipperdog, and Keeley. This interview will be available for free at timemonkradio.com, on YouTube at the Time Monk Radio channel, and at the website webbotforum.com. Are you ready to begin, Tom?
Yes, let's go.
Okay, terrific. As we tend to, our conversation today will be broken up into several sections. The first one is views of the larger reality, or the big picture. You wrote in the foreword to My Big Toe, the model of reality developed within My Big Toe is not the only valid metaphor or description of the larger nature, or the nature of larger reality. What are some of the alternatives that you consider to be valid and are adequately descriptive in their completeness of the nature of the larger reality? What are their strengths and weaknesses compared to My Big Toe?
Okay. None have it all as MBT does. And MBT shines in its ability to integrate all of the various bits and pieces into one unified understanding of the whole, and that's kind of its uniqueness. However, there are many people and groups have part of it right, and depending on one's present state of understanding, a particular partial view of the big picture may be exactly what one needs to facilitate their next step, while the entire picture may be more than one can process. So I've noticed that if you dump too much information on someone too quickly, it just chokes them. Drinking from a fire hose is one of my metaphors for that. They just can't process it. They can't jump 3 or 4 paradigm shifts all in the same hour. It's just too hard. So they need something that's not so big to swallow. They need to bite off a smaller piece. So there's lots of things, lots of models, like there are religious models, Buddhism, Taoism, et cetera, et cetera. Channeled models like Seth Speaks, Conversations with God, again, et cetera, et cetera. Personal philosophy models like, Jampolsky wrote, Love is Letting Go of Fear. There's a book, something like Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, or Everything That is Important I Learned in Kindergarten. Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, and hundreds of others. All of these have a piece of the big picture. They don't understand, they can't tell you the mechanics. They can't tell you how it works. They can't tell you why it is this way, but they can tell you that here's the way it is, and what they're doing is giving some instruction on a more optimal way to live your life. And of course, My Big Toe does that as well. However, none of these can be considered science. None can logically derive from first principles, say the structure and mechanics of reality, the purpose of existence, as well as explain all the fundamental nagging unsolved problems and paradoxes of metaphysics, the paranormal, theology, and hard science. So it's a matter of scope, I'd say. So when I say there are many, many valid, to me the word valid means useful, something that people can use. The descriptions that are around, because everybody can't take the big jump. Some people who've been in this field, they've been searching, they've been, looking at spiritual and philosophical and religious and all these models. They've been struggling with it, and they have their own experiences. And for them, they already have a lot of the paradigm shifts kind of under the belt. All they need is an explanation of how it all relates and all connects together. And then my big toe speaks well to them. They resonate with that. But those that are maybe just starting on that journey, that's probably too big a bite. So they need something to get them started, to give them just one step. You just need to take the next step, and then after that you take the next step. But trying to take a great leap is often just not productive. So that's the main comparison. My big toe is an overall comprehensive thing that unifies and derives, theology. What's theology? It's kind of man's relationship to, what's bigger than man. And, my big toe does that. Physics, well, it explains things that are unexplainable now in science, like, why are particles, probability distributions? What's the basic foundation, logical foundation that underlies quantum mechanics? Well, physicists don't know that, but MBT explains that. Same with relativity. Same with the kind of experiments that are done at Pear Labs with mind affects matter. Everybody knows that the effect of what do they call it? Now that slipped me. Where you give somebody a sugar pill and they tell them it's medicine.
Placebo.
And it works well. Placebo effect. Yeah, that's the thing that jumped out of my mind. Everybody knows that that's real, and it's not just that people think they're getting better, but it really makes them better, changes the way they heal and what happens. But nobody knows why it should be that way. Why is it what somebody tells you, or how good your doctor's bedside manner is? Why should that affect health? If health is just this body is just this machine that works in very deterministic ways, then the smile on the doctor's face really shouldn't have any effect, but it does. If the teacher is told that their children are not too bright, then the children don't do as well. Why is that? And if you tell all the children that they're not too bright, that's even worse. They turn out, not to do as well. So, we know these things. They're obvious. They've been obvious for a long time. Back in the 1950s, Norman Vincent Peale wrote, The Power of Positive Thinking. And now that's kind of turned into, on steroids, The Secret. So we have the same ideas have been around forever, and that's that the mind, the thought, the attitude, the intent has an effect on this physical reality. So mind takes all of these things, the paranormal, the normal, physics, theology, and derives the fundamental facts and basis and results of all of those with one understanding. And that understanding is based on just two assumptions rather than lots of assumptions. So that's really the difference between my big toe and other things. But that doesn't mean these other things are not important and that everybody should forget about them and go read my big toe, because that would not be wise. Many people need to process the information in different ways, take different paths. There's not just one path to this understanding. There's thousands and my word is valid. They're all valid. They'll all get you to the end if you continue to strive to, find truth and understand your experiences. And they're all valid because they all work. And we need 1,000 different ways because there's 1,000 different types of people who all need a different kind of perspective and approach to take. So it all builds. I see as all of it as it's all necessary, and every one of those 1,000 helps the other, 999. It's very symbiotic for all of them to be in there together.
Yeah, the cumulative knowledge and wisdom that's been collected piecemeal does in many ways add up to almost everything that you've got, but doesn't still quite get there because yours integrates all of those other pieces plus more, especially the physics side.
And mine does it as science. It does it as a logical process. So that's the other thing that makes mine a little different, is there's lots and lots of things that appeal to the right brain person, to the person who sees kind of big pictures naturally. But for most of us in Western culture anyway, and just doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs, mechanics, builders, architects, scientists, mathematicians, all of these people, lawyers and businessmen, they're all left brain. It's all logical process. And if you kind of live and work by logical process, then reading the Bhagavad Gita just doesn't do anything for you, because it just doesn't make sense. You can't learn much from it because you don't process that way. You don't see big pictures.
Right.
So this is a kind of a science and spirituality and whatever for the rest of us, who are left brain and would like to see it derived logically rather than just asserted philosophically.
Sure. No, that's great. Thanks much, Tom. I really appreciate you bringing out those points, especially for those of us that are very much left-brained. Keely, kind of like to jump in on the physics side for a little bit.
Hi, Tom.
Hello.
I'm interested in talking about the double slit experiment a little bit.
Okay.
I was wondering what could be deduced from the double slit experiment if only one slit is considered, in terms of the overlapping waves. And then the second part of the question that could be considered a follow-up is if you applied the individual or awareness, consciousness, as being plugged into the photon chute or the overlapping wave patterns and collapsed wave. Did that make sense?
I'm not really sure what it is you're asking here. In a double slit experiment, of course, you have to have two slits, and you have to have the possibility of interaction, superposition between the probability of the particle being in either slit. When you have one slit, if you cover up one of those and you just have a hole, you still get a diffraction pattern of sorts. It has different names in physics. One of them is Newton rings. They're like circular diffraction patterns, but that's a different thing. That's not really quantum mechanics. That's just optics. If you fire particles one at a time at a single hole, you'll just get a pile of particles behind the hole. If you put a wave, then you get these Newton patterns that I'm talking about, the rings around it. So I'm not quite sure what you mean when you're talking about a single slit in the context of a double slit experiment.
I guess I was wondering if we applied this to an individual and their consciousness or their awareness, if you could plug in either awareness or consciousness as instead of the photon I guess I'm not saying this very well. If you put awareness looking through the hole, would the thoughts then become the wave patterns of choice that might be considered in making a decision, for instance?
Okay, I can see that that metaphor. We do, of course, at any time, you have choices to make, and there are probabilities. You have, let's say, in any particular thing you come to where there are choices, there may be 10 or 20 or 100 choices, and there's a certain probability that you will make any of those choices, and then you get to make a decision with free will. And when you make a decision with free will, you do one of those things. You make a choice. And doing nothing, of course, is one of those choices. So everything, you have to make a choice. And how you make that choice just depends on your individual free will. So people are all the time presented with possibilities, an array of possibilities. And out of that array of possibilities, they have to pick one. And as they pick one, that changes reality. That makes a difference in the reality that you find inside of you and outside of you. So yes, in that sense, individuals are choice-making entities that modify probabilities with their intent. They make choices, and by doing so, they change the result of what happens. The logical consequences change, and the reality they live in changes based on those decisions. Is that getting close to what you're after?
Yes, I was kind of looking at the whole double slit experiment as a way to look at decisions that we make, and when a choice is made, that collapses one of the waves of the probability.
Yes, right. When you make a choice, then that collapses the probability of what's going to happen next. Then collapses to that result in exactly the same way as it does in double slit. Yes.
Thank you, Tom.
Tom, this is Chipper Dog, and my whole family has just been enthralled listening to your talks on My Big Toe. I have not read the entire book, although I've traversed its entire scope in bits and pieces. One of the questions that had come up in discussion with my wife was if squirrels and birds and dogs and cats and other animals are aware of the environment, then how can a tree really not already be rendered data? And is there an example in between a proton and a tree that may be more realistic for virtual reality that would not necessarily be rendered data because animals would not rely on it?
Sure.
And is that clear to you? Because I can...
Yeah. I
Okay.
I kind of got what you're talking about. Well, let me take a shot at that, and then if I don't get what you're
Sure.
aiming at, we can bring it back up again. If
Sure.
you're looking for an anonymous object that no sentient entity pays attention to, there's lots of those. What about an ordinary dime-sized rock laying on the ground among thousands of other such rocks? And let's say it's in the middle of the Nevada, desert. Obviously, there's not a lot of critters out there. There are some, but they're few and far between, and dime-sized rocks are a dime a dozen, right? Probably less than a dime a dozen. Or, what if it's laying in a farmer's field, and the field's full of wheat? You can't even see the thing. What about a rock lying underground? Okay. None are individually rendered in detail to any consciousness most of the time. Pebbles on the ground that you walk over. Let's say you have a driveway and it's crushed stone, and a bunch of pebbles. And as you walk over that absent-mindedly, every time you walk over it, those rocks may be in a different pattern, a different configuration, because you're not paying attention to it. Now, if you stop and look and say, okay, right here next to this tree, when I pass it, there's these 5 rocks in a row. Now, you see, that's rendered to you in that very specific way. But when you're just walking, kind of looking at the sky, they're not even really rendered to you. They're just kind of there in a very general sense. It's not specific.
So a real fluid rendering.
Right. So if you're thinking that there is an objective world out there that needs to be rendered to exist, there isn't. And that's the thing that stumps most people. They've got this gut level sense of there is a world out there, and it's objective reality. It's out there. I know it. And something then has to keep it rendering. Otherwise, do these things disappear? At night when nobody's in the park, do all the trees go away, because nobody's looking at them? Well, no, the trees were never there. There are no such thing as physical trees, and they don't exist in the park. So what's happening is that they're just being rendered to you. Every individual, every consciousness, including the squirrels and the bugs, if they're aware, if they have if they're conscious, if they're sentient, then they get a data stream sent to them that renders their environment. Okay. Now, so let's talk about that tree in the park. If we have a tree in a park in a small town, okay, and in that small town, after midnight, there's nobody around, and it's off the main highway and nobody drives through or whatever. So what happens to the tree in the park? Well, nothing happens to it. That tree was just rendered in all the minds of the people who looked at it. It doesn't really exist as a physical tree. So when there's nobody who needs to be rendering it, what's the computer going to do? Who's it going to send the data to if there's nobody looking? You're not going to be sitting in your home watching TV and suddenly the picture of the tree comes into your mind because it needs to be rendered to somebody. It's not like that. The tree is virtual. Your body is virtual, and you get things rendered to you as you look in that direction. So right now you may be looking at your computer screen and you're not looking at the chair you're sitting in, then the chair you're sitting in is not being rendered. Well,
right.
It's not being rendered to you, but that doesn't mean you fall on the floor. You see, it just means that you're not getting the data describing that chair into your data stream because you're not aware of it. Now, if you think about it, okay, I can feel it. I can feel it on my back. I can feel it underneath of me. Then it is being rendered to you through that sense of touch.
So it's kind of participatory then.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so now my example of the tree in the woods that you're talking about was not meant to be a practical example. Okay, it was just a thought experiment to demonstrate the concept of virtual reality. But let's say that there are bugs in the world and squirrels. How does that affect it? Well, if a man walks into a woods and that has a squirrel living in a tree right about at the point where the man walks into the woods, then the probability that the man will see that same tree that the squirrel lives in is 1. Why? Because the squirrel's already brought that into this reality frame. Okay, that tree was rendered there by the squirrel because the squirrel is a conscious being and the squirrel's living in this tree, so the tree and the surroundings are being rendered for the squirrel. And we know that one of the rules are that once you bring something into this reality frame, once it's rendered into physical matter reality, then it has to stay here. You can't have things appearing and disappearing all the time. So once they're here, it stays. Same with the double slit experiment. Once you know what slit that electron's going through, then it just acts like a particle, and it has to stay a particle. That's why it travels in a straight line and piles up behind the slit, because once it's here, it's here. So then the probability that the man will see that tree, instead of being 50-50, is going to be 1 because it's already being rendered there for some other conscious being. That's what it means to have a multiplayer game.
Sure.
Okay. Now, if I said it differently, if I said, if a probable man walks into a probable woods that has a probable squirrel living in a probable tree, then you'd say, well, okay, I get that. All of it's just probable, but we don't say it that way. We just say if a man walks into the woods that has a squirrel, we don't put that concept in there that all of this is just probability. Okay, the squirrel, when the squirrel looks at the tree and interacts with that tree, it gets it rendered from a squirrel's viewpoint. That's not the same as a man's viewpoint. It sees it as a squirrel sees things. And that squirrel can see and smell and do things that people don't see and smell, and vice versa. The man sees things within a context that the squirrel doesn't see. So it's only rendered to the squirrel in from a squirrel's reality view, and it's rendered to the man in the man's reality view. So they don't get the same thing rendered to them, but they get parts of the same thing, each rendered to each other. But because it's a multiplayer game, you can't have inconsistencies. You can't have a squirrel in this reality living in a tree that doesn't exist for the man, because then how does the man watch the squirrel go into something that doesn't exist for him? You see, it's a conflict. So in a real woods where there's bugs and squirrels and things, then most of that stuff is rendered in some way. And when people come into it, their probability is that they'll see the things just like, that these critters and bugs and things are dealing with. But they'll see it from their own view, rendered to a person's worldview rather than a bumblebee's worldview. And what does a woods look like to a bumblebee? It probably doesn't all look like what people see. But the two can't conflict. So that's the point. The bumblebee's view of the world and the man's view of the world can both have to coexist. There can't be
they can be subsetted.
Yeah, they can be subsetted. So they have to coexist without breaking any rules. That suddenly the bumblebee, doesn't get a different world because the man walked into the woods.
Sure. Right.
And the man doesn't, has to have a view that will contain the bumblebee's view. So it's like that. So now when something, say, we'll call it virgin, if there's some virgin space that's never been perceived by any conscious being, it's rendered, that means a measurement's taken. Somebody looks, a measurement's taken, then that thing has to persist in this physical reality according to the rule set. Now, quantum
Okay.
mechanics is a showcase for this aspect of reality. We talk about this in quantum mechanics in a double slit, and this is where we think, it kind of shines. This is a showcase because most of the free particles are virgin possibilities to a consciousness, to a conscious being making the measurement. What that means is their natural uncertainty, and in double slit, we're really talking about uncertainty in position, uncertainty in location. That uncertainty is very large relative to their size, you see? So they have an uncertainty in position that's huge compared to their size. Well, what does that do? That means nobody knows where the hell they are. They're just probability distributions. We don't know. So then it's like this virgin thing that nobody's perceived. They're unperceivable by us, you see? So for us, they're just in probability. So, a tree is rendered into conscious, to a conscious critter or a man, as that critter has capability to see it and interpret it, and whatever's measured is made available. Basically we're talking about information being made available when I say measure. So anything where the information is made available in the physical reality then stays in the physical reality until that information is removed from the physical reality. So that's kind of the bigger story about the man that walks into the woods. The reason he sees that dead tree is because there's a squirrel living in it, so that dead tree has to be there. So if we complicate the problem, but when I make that little story, I simplify it all down to just a one-dimensional concept so that people aren't confused.
Yeah.
It looks like I confused the two of you anyway.
No, she just has this uncanny ability to go right for a question that would have been explainable from an outside viewpoint. And she's a scientist too, so she goes down into the particle level.
Great. I love it when scientists pick this up and get interested in it.
Oh, it has just astounded her. She listened to it on a road trip that she goes, I can't believe this. And you talked to the guy? Yeah. So, yeah, this is wonderful. The explanation you gave was a very, very full and complete one. Thank you.
Okay, good. You're welcome.
Tom, this is McLaren. Your conversation with Chipper and his question brought up a recollection I have from when I was studying psychology way back in the late 70s and early 80s in my undergraduate college years. And I have a recollection of an experiment that was conducted on consciousness and at what low level does it exist and can it be measured. The experiment, as I recollect it, was two essentially identical houseplants were seated in a room, and the measurement instruments were the equivalent of picking up the electrical activity flowing in and around and through the plants. A variety of people were paraded past the plants, and then an individual of the many that were paraded by came along and physically just tore up and shredded one of the plants, and then left some more people paraded by, and then the plants were left alone. A couple of days later, the same individual that did the shredding of the one plant is brought back into the room where the remaining house plant still sat, and the plant gave off all kinds of wild electrical signals as if it had recognized the individual. Have you ever heard of this experiment?
No, but I can imagine it. Yeah.
Okay. So to take this back then, if the tree isn't rendered until a level of consciousness is there, be it a squirrel, a bug, a man, whoever, why are they not rendering themselves when there are no other higher levels of consciousness around them? If that makes sense.
Yeah, why aren't they rendering themselves?
Yes. Do they not have consciousness?
No, a tree is not conscious in the same way that I'm using the word.
Okay.
Now, we can expand that definition to include things like trees and rocks, but the way I use the word consciousness is sentient, something that is interactive, something that reacts, something that has a finite decision space. Okay, Now a decision space means you have different ways, different choices you can make, and you use your free will to pick one. The tree, trees do things like they will, plants do. Take a sunflower that tracks the sun as it moves across the sky. Right. But it's doing that because of basically a design process. That's what it's designed to do. As the sun heats up the tissues on one side, they expand, and the cool ones contract, and it tends to twist the flower. It's not the flower making choices. It's not a sentient choice, but it's just a mechanical choice. And there's lots of bugs and things also that don't really, I'd say aren't making decisions. They do things because they have evolved a program, if you will, that if you give them this stimulus, they will have that response. Now, you can tell if it's sentient if you give them that stimulus, and depending on, in the same way, in the same environment, and sometimes they do this and sometimes they do that. Now it looks like they're making choices. But if they always just do the same thing, given the same stimulus, then that's probably a program. But it gets very hard for us to tell the difference between, if you're talking about bugs, say, it's very hard to tell what's sentient and what's just biology.
A reaction.
Yeah.
Is it reacting to the environment as it changes around it, or is it making choices within its free will decisions?
Within its free will. So if I may take plants and rocks and things like that out of that category of being conscious, because they don't have an obvious decision space or free will function going on. They just kind of do what they do. But then that takes us back to the experiment. Okay, so when that person walked by, there was a lot of activity on those measurements of measuring the plant. Now, there's a couple of reasons that might be. One of the main reasons that might be is that the people involved in this experiment knew what was going on, right? They were aware. They knew that guy A had torn up a plant, and now guy A was coming back, and they were wondering what the plants were going to do and how they were going to act. So now you have a bunch of people with intents, with, they know what's going on in the experiment. In other words, it isn't being done blind. It's like, again, this placebo effect. You have people with intent and expectation on the outcome, and that can modify the outcome tremendously. Yeah. And that may be a strong part of it, that that people were involved with intents, because now it's muddied. What's going on there? Is it the people that make those detectors suddenly go wild when that person comes in because they're anticipating that kind of a thing? Or is there, is there some other part of it? Now we look at living things like trees as opposed to rocks, and we can almost, say that there is a kind of a primordial consciousness there, that
they grow better when people talk to them and treat them
again,
nicely.
That's again then the person, though. The person you see as having positive intents toward the tree. Oh, you're a sweet little tree. I love you, and I want you to grow up and be this and that. And the person talks to the tree. They play music for the tree. Well, the person is taking an interest. That's intent, trying to bias a positive outcome for the tree. And that will make the tree do better. Again, that's not necessarily, just because the person does that and the tree grows up, doesn't necessarily mean that the tree is happy now because the person is loving them up and talking to them and playing music for them. It means that person is modifying the probable future for a healthier, more robust tree. Again, we have an experiment that's got some loose variables in it. That
we certainly don't know what they are, because we haven't examined them closely enough to make sure that all of those variables have been controlled for.
Right. And what you'd have to do, you'd have to set up a situation that was done entirely mechanically, and you'd have to do it at times that nobody knew about. So you'd have to set up this machine that every hour or so, it would thrash a tree, and it would do it randomly, and nobody would be around, and nobody would know what time it would be that this happened. And then you'd have to let this go on for weeks, and then and see if the plants all got nervous, when the hour came to take a thrashing, or things like that. If you got the consciousness out of it, it would probably change the results of the experiment.
Okay.
It would probably change that. Now, it's possible. I had somebody once talk to me, and they said, well, I walk into this very, very old, ancient forest. That's one that's never been cut. It's natural and has been there since the beginning. Big trees. And he says, I just feel the difference. I feel the energy in that woods. And it's like there's, the idea was that it's kind of like a group consciousness, if you will, maybe a very dull kind of awareness of existence, of being among these particular plants. Now that's something that's a little different. Rather than each tree being a sentient entity, you kind of have the trees as a group, as a species, having some awareness of their existence. Now, is that the same as making decisions and making choices? Not exactly, but it does give them kind of a sense of consciousness, if you will, a sense of awareness of the fact that they exist, and that maybe it's dry, or maybe that there's a fire burning, and they may react to things like that on that level. So they have a level of awareness without being on a level where they're actually making decisions. Oh, that's a nice person that just, did this and this for me. So there's a difference there between being sentient and being aware that you exist. And I do think that plants have kind of a basic awareness of existing, but I don't think it gets to the point that they're saying, oh, I'd like to, take a walk around the woods. Obviously, they can't do that. I'd like to do this or that. That's what I'm calling this kind of specific consciousness that I talk about in the books.
Okay, great. We've kind of backed into the next topic, which is exploration of consciousness. And so at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Uranus Rising and have her join our conversation.
Hi, Tom.
Hello.
I've been listening to you speak of parallel processing, but I have a bit of a specific question for you on this.
Okay.
Is this like in a conversation when you're hearing what the other person is saying through their words and such, but you're also being open to other data coming in at the same time, being open to insights or understandings in that moment? Or another example might be observing what is happening in a situation, but again, being open to data that is kind of providing insights or understanding with a big picture. Is this what you're speaking of, or have I got it all wrong?
No, you don't have it wrong at all. Parallel processing is just that. It's taking in more than one data stream of information at the same time. Something even as trivial as this. Let's say you're sitting on the sofa and you're watching TV and there's some program on you're watching, but at the same time, something else is going on in the room. Let's say maybe your grandchildren are, playing over in the corner, or somebody else is sitting in a chair next to you and they're knitting a sweater. Then you are aware, if you are aware of both of those, if you're aware of what's being said on the story on the TV, and you're aware of the person knitting their sweater, and you're aware of the grandkids playing in the corner, and you're following the story, you're kind of keeping up with where they are with the knitting, and you're kind of keeping up with the grandkids, you're parallel processing. Now, what does that mean? That means that you're not really focused on any of it entirely. So you maybe miss a few points in a story because, you're not paying real close attention, and you may miss a little bit about how the knitting's going on or with the grandkids, but you kind of you're getting all the data and you're processing it, all at once. That's all I'm talking about, just parallel processing, getting multiple data streams in and being able to juggle them all at the same time. And when I talk about parallel processing, I talk in terms of various reality frames. So you can be in this reality frame, and somebody comes up to you and says, oh, I want to tell you about my Aunt Susie. She just got diagnosed with such and such, and she's having a real hard time. And then they go on and tell you the story. And while they're telling you the story, you go look up Aunt Susie, diagnose what's wrong with her, where it is, and start working on healing her while they're talking to you about the story, because you can parallel process both of those at the same time. Or you can be in multiple reality frames where you're experiencing maybe this physical reality. Let's say you're taking a walk in the park, and that doesn't require a lot of thinking. Assuming there are no big holes in the sidewalk, right? This doesn't require a lot of awareness. And while you're walking through the park, you can be in a meditation state. You can be in a different reality because this reality is not requiring your full attention. And some people, of course, well, most of us from time to time, we get to where we're going in an automobile and think, geez, how did I get here? I don't remember the trip at all. You see, and that's because part of them was processing all the data, stopping at the, the red lights, hitting the gas, hitting the brake, making the turns. But it didn't require a whole lot because it was the way they go, every day.
Yeah.
So it was very, very familiar to the point that they didn't need a lot of attention to do it. And their mind was really off doing something else. So that's another kind of parallel processing. It's just that people often will get very focused on something and they feel like they have to be in state A or state B. If they're here in this reality, they can't also be in some other reality, or if they're in this reality, they can't be in two other different realities, but you can. And it's more of a, I can't remember the term, but instead of actually truly parallel processing, you're almost just very quickly sampling the various realities. So you sample this a little, you sample the TV a little, you sample the knitting, you sample the grandchildren, and then you sample the TV, and your attention is kind of doing fast sampling. And a computer person has a word for that, but
time slice.
Yeah, that's it. So you're taking little time slices, you're taking little samples by a whole bunch of different things, but what that means is you're not continually sampling anything. So you get a little you get a little fuzzy, a little grayed out on everything. And the wider you spread that, so now let's say you're doing as many as 4 different streams, you start to get marginal, in those that require more of your focus.
Okay.
So that's kind of the way it works. It's just doing more than one thing at a time at the same time by a very quick sampling process.
Yeah. Well, I was just curious about this because I've had many, many instances of talking with a person and listening to what they say, but there's like a parallel process going on where I'm getting information about them that is not necessarily what they're saying, but it ends up being very accurate.
Right.
And
getting data out of the database as they talk.
Yeah.
Yes, just like healing or doing something as they talk.
Yeah.
Sure, that's it's just a matter of opening up your intent and your reality to be a larger reality. You don't have your reality just here in the physical, but your reality can be here in the physical and be getting data from the database at the same time. And there's no problem with that. And you can do that to, you might be doing that, say, talking to several people, and each one of them has a sick Aunt Susie, and you may be healing, 3 people at once. And that's not a problem either. That's what I mean by parallel processing. And most of us do parallel processing, a lot of the time. And I shall say that ladies are better at it than men, and that young people are better at it than old people. It's just a thing that we do. Often I'll go to some counter in an office someplace, standing in line to get my car's tags or something, and there'll be a girl sitting behind there, and she's got somebody on the phone. She's talking to me and typing on a typewriter, and she's got all this stuff going. She may be doing 4 things at once, and doesn't seem to be stressed by it at all. So that's just, you hardly ever see guys do that. Although guys can learn to do it if they practice. It just comes a little easier and more natural to the ladies. And I suspect that's because they've spent a couple of million years taking care of kids and doing 6 other things, around the cave, trying to, to get by and survive. Yeah. And the men out on the hunt have to focus very intently on exactly what they're doing and kind of shut out everything else. That's kind of the difference between the hunter and the gatherer. The hunter's intently focused, and the gatherer is kind of aware of everything going on around him.
Well, do you think that women are better at this because they're kind of attuned to the possibility, the babies might be crying or something might be happening that?
Yeah, I think ladies are generally better at it just because. Yes, that's in their DNA. That's kind of the way men and women have different realities. We don't live in the same reality, you know. I mean, we share, but actually every individual lives in their own reality. But women have a lot of characteristics, and the way they interpret reality, this is different than the way, you know, men interpret reality. And one of the things that men do that women aren't quite as good at is visualization. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of women will have trouble if you say, well, you know, visualize, you know, a three-headed man, you know, with pointy ears and whatever. They'll get the sense of it and they'll feel it, but they don't actually see it. They don't see it in you know, high definition Technicolor. They get a fuzzier view, whereas most males will visualize it, you know, very precisely. And I think, again, it's just, you know, millions of years of evolution have created, you know, kind of different ways of approaching data between the sexes. And you know, ladies are just better at this parallel processing. And I think it's just out of, you know, need. They need to be. And when the men need to be, they get good at it too.
Oh, you know? Good. So we should tell the men that they need to be doing that.
Yeah. If they practice, they can get good at it too. It's not that they don't have the capacity. It's that they're in their life and in their world, that's not that important. And in the ladies' life and world, that is very important. Yeah. So you kind of get good at what you practice.
So let me just break in real quick on this.
Sure.
The reading that I've done on the neuro physiology, the women tend to have a wider corpus callosum, the connection between the hemispheres, which allows them more fuller processing power, a more integrated processing power. And just from looking at some of the neurophysiology readings that I've done, the visual cortex on the male is far more pronounced than on the female. And I'm just is that tendency of the physical, of the PMR piece that's in our heads, is that due to that type of activity?
Well, yeah, you know, think about the, you know, who's left brain and who's more right brain. You know, typically your right brain people tend to be the ladies. Typically your left brain people tend more to be the, you know, the men. That's that thicker corpus callosum is what probably you need to be right brain to integrate more, and that precision that you need to focus on something and stay focused on it is something that does you, you know, is better out in the corporate world someplace, because focus is very important there. You can't be distracted by all the relationships and things going on and who said what to who. You know, none of that is important. You have to stay real focused on your problem, whether you're trying to, you know, catch a rabbit or take care of children. You know, they have two different levels of the way you process data. If you're trying to catch a rabbit, you need to be very focused on that rabbit and on your immediate environment, and all the rest of the world just disappears for you. It's just you and that rabbit. You see, that's focus. And if you're trying to take care of kids, you got 10 things to do at once because they're all over the place.
Right.
So so I think we just evolve differently, and that would be that. See, this evolution of this physical world takes place in a simulation. And it develops constraints. This is the way we approach things. Our DNA kind of provides constraints on what consciousness then, the virtual reality the consciousness plays in, has to play within the rule set and the constraints, you know, of the game. And the constraints of the game are evolved in this simulation. So yes, there are fundamental differences. The other thing, though, we talk about the brain, but we don't want to get this backwards. Many people think that you evolve this brain, and then that affects, you know, your consciousness and the decisions you make. It actually works the other way around. You have this consciousness, this awareness, and the brain will evolve and modify. The physical will actually modify to provide a platform for that consciousness.
Okay.
One of the examples of that was, and I say it occasionally in my talks, is the sheep morality. Biologists noticed that female sheep were expressing moral decisions And that was a big surprise. What, animals with, moral decisions? It
Sure.
shouldn't have been a big surprise, but for some reason it was. And what they saw was that a mother sheep would take care of another mother's orphaned baby. So if a mother sheep had had some kids, and they were still nursing and still needed the mother's attention to survive, and that something happened to that mother, so the mother was killed, instead of letting those kids just starve to death, which is what the biologists would think, because it's not in some other female's best interest to share her resources with some
Right.
Other DNA that is in her home. They have the idea that every individual is trying to further their own DNA in the gene pool. Well, that didn't compute. So they, of course, what do biologists do when they find things like that? They kill the sheep and look at their brains.
Right.
And they said, oh, well, look, here on these sheep brains, they have this little knob on the brain that is the place where moral decision is made. And that's, we humans have this little chunk of our brain, and that's where the moral decisions are made, at that chunk. Now here, the sheep has a little lobe right there, so that's why they have moral decisions. And the intent, or the idea was that the brain developed this little lobe, therefore the sheep could have moral, action. And it's just the opposite. That's 180 degrees, out of whack with the truth. What happened is the sheep made moral decisions. It has decisions, things that it can do and not do. It became moral, made moral intent. In other words, it's making choices. And as it makes choices, it lowers its entropy, increases the quality of consciousness, just like people. And it decided it would be a good thing to do to take care of those baby lambs, whether it was in their, best interest or not, wasn't the point. It was the right thing to do. So they did it. And because of that, their brain had to modify to support that behavior, you see. So we do the same sort of thing. As we grow and we change, as we, become love and whatever, our brains will modify to support that kind of thinking. So it does work in a backwards way. And we see something horrible. We go to a horror movie and we see all kinds of horrible things. Our brain will change to incorporate that fear.
Yeah.
Given that horror movie frightened us and we were terrified in it, then that actually does what I would call brain damage, because now it adds that part of your construction that supports terror. You see?
Yeah.
So it's not a, and we know that when we have cases that are really, so strong that they're hard to miss. And let's say a child is walking in the park with these parents, and some mugger comes out and kills both of the parents in front of the child. Well, the child sees that and it affects them. It changes them. And it's not just that it damages them psychologically, and it's something that they may take years to get over or may never get over. It's that it actually changes them. When you have that kind of fear, your body changes to support that.
Yeah.
You see, and now it's a physiological problem, not just a psychological problem. Your body is in support of that kind of terror. And now you have to overcome it. So you've just gotten in a hole and you got to get yourself out of the hole. So if you go out of your way to see horrible things, you're not doing yourself any favors. You're just digging a hole for yourself that you have to overcome in some other way.
Sure.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, gosh. That just worried somebody, I think.
Well, I'm just thinking of how much harder it would be for people then. You have the physiological as well as the consciousness challenges then to overcome.
That's
so it makes it double hard.
Yeah, and then you have to overcome that and grow up. This is the pull yourself up with the bootstraps thing, You have to overcome that, change your attitude, make good choices, and then that brain will change, that physiology will change.
Yeah.
But you become what you are.
Yes. Tom, to take it back to the differences between male and female consciousnesses,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that then we choose a particular experience package in a male or female body to offer lessons to us, either to multitask or parallel process, or to learn focusing then?
Yes, we do. Definitely. We take, and not everybody to the same extent. It's a very individual sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
People who are kind of new at the game of conscious evolution, they don't really make so many choices like that. They just, when they die and they get out, they just hop back in, and anything will do, because they're just trying to collect experience. But let's say you've collected experience for a long time, and you realize that here are your weak points and here are your strong points, and this is your kind of the ideas and things that got in your way of learning and growing. Then you start to set up situations that optimize your probability of learning and growing. And so you do pick those kinds of things. If what you really, if you've been very right-brained and you have big pictures, but you don't do logical processing, then you may find that you are out of balance. You can't, because it really takes both. You need the logical process, and you need to process holistically, and you need to do both of those, at the same time. It can't be one or the other. If it's one or the other, you're very out of balance. We here in the West kind of are very out of balance to the left brain side. We need to develop the intuitive and the holistic part of us a lot more. And when you get out of balance, you end up with problems. You create difficulties for yourself and everybody else. So if you find that you're kind of out of balance, then you need to pick things that kind of force you to develop those parts of you that are weaker. And yes, those kinds of choices are made all the time. And if you go to the far extreme, there are some people who come here for a very, very specific reason, not just to work on anger management, but a very specific, they're going to connect with these people, they're going to do a certain task. And there they have, they pick situations that you say are almost scripted, with lots of nudging and lots of, bells going off when they meet a certain person. Suddenly it's like, oh, that's the one, or that's this or that. And they make these connections. That's because they have a very planned thing that they're trying to accomplish, or they are trying to help and be part of a group accomplishment or whatever. And so it goes from no scripting at all, just jump in and, whatever happens, it's experience, I'll just deal with it, to something that's very, very scripted, to where all sorts of things happen because they're supposed to, because you're supposed to do certain things. But those are the two extremes. Most of us are really in the middle there, where we make some choices based on what we need, and then we learn a little, and then we go do it again.
Well, I think that makes me wonder then, is that something to strive for then, in life reviews and whatnot, based on our needs. So thank you very much.
Yes,
it's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it is. And there will be those there that will help you make that assessment as well.
Yeah. Well, I've already started, so I'm getting a head start on it.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
Keely, you're up next.
Hi, Tom. I'm back again.
Oh, good.
I'm wondering if you could talk to or speak to the differences between will and willpower, perhaps with an example or two.
Okay, sure. I can do that. Will. Okay, now we're talking about will, the noun. Okay, it's defined in my dictionary as part of the mind that makes decisions. Power to decide, it's the power to decide, the process of making decisions, and that's what the dictionary calls will. Of course, there's will, the verb, but that's something different. I will do it, and we're not talking about that, but will, the noun. Okay, so that's the power to decide. That part of the mind that makes decisions is called the will, and that's often used as a synonym for the word intent. Will and intent kind of are used interchangeably, but they are a little different. Intent is to plan or have a purpose. Your intent reflects a plan or purpose, something that you want to accomplish is your intent. Okay, so we can think of that as will is the action, while intent is the content of that action. So will is the executor of intent. I think I just made up a word, executor, but will is, executes intent. Maybe that's what I should say. Okay, while the degree of focus and clarity of an intent and the force of will with which it is applied to a specific purpose defines willpower. Okay, so now we bring in two new words, which is focus and clarity. So if you have an intent and your intent is clear, and if your focus on executing that intent and your focus on the intent is strong, now what that means is basically there's little noise. Okay, your mind is focused on one thing, on that thing, with very little noise. And by, noise is what we try to get rid of by learning to meditate. Okay, so focus and clarity mean low noise, and noise reduction is typically accomplished through meditation. That's why we learn to meditate, so we can stop all the random thoughts dribbling through our mind constantly, because that's the noise I'm talking about. That noise actually divides up your attention. Remember, we were talking about parallel processing, and if you parallel process with 5 things, none of them are particularly in high definition. They're all, and it's the same thing. If you've got 100 thoughts running through your mind a minute, and most of us do, if those people who have can remember when they first started meditating, there's just thoughts constantly pouring through your mind. Well, all of that reduces your bandwidth. It gets in the way. It gives you less cycles, if you will, for what it is you'd like to do. And so we learn to meditate to get rid of the noise. We want to have a clear intent, so it's not a confused thing. If our intent is something fuzzy like do good things, then you get a very fuzzy result. Okay, so that's really where willpower comes. So the degree and focus and clarity of an intent and the force of will with which it's applied, the will then being the action, okay? And if you do that to a specific purpose, so you have that focus and clarity and a will to get it done, and it's a very specific purpose, then that's what we call willpower. Now you've developed some willpower to get it done. So if any of those are weak, if you're out of focus, you don't have good clarity, or you're not really care that much whether it gets done or not, then you don't have any willpower. That your will is impotent, you would say. And that's an important thing, because when we, let's say, want to heal somebody, we are more effective healing if we have focus, clarity, and purpose, right? If we have a will that wants to do this. So if we just make a wish and say, oh, I wish so and so would get better, or something like that, that doesn't carry much focus, much clarity, or even that much will, and it doesn't affect much. Now, does it affect any at all? Probably a little, because any intent will make will have a small amount of power, if you will, with it. So even the wish carries a small amount of power, but not that much. So how effective you are at changing things with your mind has to do with this focus, clarity, and will. Okay, that's kind of the thing, because people will, of course, say that, well, I tell them that they can heal, they just have to learn how. And they said, oh, I tried that, doesn't work, I'm not any good at it. Well, that's because they haven't learned to focus their mind, to be very clear, and to have the desire, to have the will to do it, and to hold all that still for a long period of time without stray thoughts, defocusing that to something that's not very powerful. I guess the analogy there that I use, or the metaphor, is that if you have sun coming through a window, and that sun, if you stand on the other side of the window, will make you warm. But if you take a great big lens and focus that sun coming through the window, you can burn a hole right through a piece of metal. You can start fires, because suddenly you've taken that same amount of energy that you were feeling warm with, and you've focused it to something that can make powerful changes. So it's the same way with our minds. Does that help with the will and the willpower?
That does, but also you said something that leads me to ask another question, which is,
Okay.
You mentioned that someone might not care too much.
Yes.
So that they wouldn't then execute um, it's their willpower or
Right.
their will. So does that indicate a strong desire, and or what kind of emotion then feeds that?
Okay, there's a couple of things. You've probably heard me talk about the difference between the kind of the intellectual level of action or decisions and the being level.
Yes.
On the intellectual level, you do things because you think that's what you should do, or what that's best for you to do. It's an intellectual kind of process. And then there's the being level. You do it just because that's what you do. You know, you haven't thought about it, you just do it. A very good difference there would be if you see that somebody has lost some money, has fallen out of their pocket, and you know, if you think and say, well, it would be the right thing for me to do to give that back. Besides, those people are watching and they'll know if I stick it in my pocket and run off, so I'll go do that. You see, there's very little power in that. There's very little morality in that, even though you do the same thing. You give the money back as opposed to somebody that says, oh, look, they lost the money. Here, let me give it back. You see, without thinking about it, it's just the way you are. So that's the difference between the intellect and the being level. If you approach your healing from an intellectual viewpoint, oh, I'm going to try to heal this person, wouldn't that be nifty? And it's all an intellectual thing. You're not going to be very powerful with it. You have to have it at the being level to where this is an expression of yourself at the core, not a game that you're playing through the intellect, you see? So that makes a real big difference in the amount of power that you can generate.
So it's really not an emotion.
No, it's not so much an emotion that makes, if getting emotional about it, you know, can help or can hurt. If your emotion about it is creating a lot of noise and it'll defocus you, then the emotion will get in the way. If the emotion is something that is expressed at the being level, then it can give you a stronger feeling. So the emotion by itself depends on which level where that emotion is. Emotion can be shallow, it can be ego-based. You know, much of our emotion is ego-based. It's ego that triggers the emotion. That's not what I want. You know, I want it to be this way. I don't want so-and-so to be sick. I want them to be the other way. Well, that's just ego. And you may have a lot of emotion that's being fueled by ego. That does not provide you with any kind of focus or clarity. What you need is a strong emotion at the being level. Mm-hmm. And that isn't the kind of emotion that makes you wring your hands. That's just a strong, that's just a strong intent. That's a strong focus. So there is a real big difference there. So people who are emotional about a thing often are not very effective. That's why some people have trouble healing themselves or their loved ones. You know, they just can't do it. They can't get the picture. It just doesn't work. That's because they are not focused. They can't, because they have this, they want it to work. They feel pressure and so on, and all that's ego. They can't just, doctors do the same thing. A doctor does not operate, on their own children or on their own wives. They give it to another doctor to do because they wouldn't have the clarity and the focus that they need, because they would have all this emotion that was fuzzing up the problem for them. If they had to make a split-second decision that was, had to do with life and death, and it was their child, they may stumble over it because of their fear. So once you get rid of the fear and ego, then emotion is fine. It helps add power. But with the fear and ego, emotion just makes it muddy.
So that really speaks to where we even decide to place our intent, depending on how much ego and fear we have.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. If your intent is being driven by ego and fear, then that's not good. If you know that, then you should cut that out or stop and look at the fear, look at the ego, and get rid of it, because that's applying your energy to meet the needs of fear and ego, and that will not lead to any good place. That will generally, not be something that's on your path to better evolution, to raising the quality of your consciousness. That's not a thing to do. And you do want to focus and have clarity on things that will, and make choices that will lower your entropy, increase your quality of consciousness. So yeah, it's real important. Getting rid of the fear and ego, expectations, beliefs, wants, needs, desires, all that stuff that gets in the way. That's the key thing. If you're acting out of love and caring, then you will have a lot more clarity and focus than if you're acting out of fear and ego and belief. So those people that have the most focus and can make the most changes in future probability, those are the people who are more belief-centered. I mean, more love-centered. They're not belief-centered or fear-centered or ego-driven. So that's why you have lots of people who are fear and ego-driven, and they can do little bits of things, and they can learn and practice to try to focus their minds, and they can have some small effects, but generally they're very limited. They can only get but so strong and only do so much, and it turns out to be something that really isn't very productive for them. But if you're going to do things like healing or out of body or other things with your mind, and you're coming from a place of love and caring, and it's about others, you can develop and grow with it. It can be a growing experience, and you can get very strong with it.
You just answered the question I was going to ask, which was, how do we move into that?
Yeah. How do you get there? How do you move in that direction? Well, the problem is ego and fear. Well, fear is really the problem because ego is a subset of fear. Often, most of the time, belief is also a subset of fear. So expectation is a subset of fear and ego. So fear's the key thing, and the best way to go about getting rid of fear, ego, expectations, and beliefs is look at the ego first. That's the easiest part to catch. That's the most obvious. Whereas the fears, if you try looking at the fears, they're hard to find because they're so ingrained into your being that as far as an individual is concerned, that's just the way things are, and it's all perfectly reasonable and logical the way they should be. And you don't really see it as a problem because it's like the fish doesn't really notice water, because it's just everywhere and it's always there. So the thing to do, though, is look at that ego, because that stands out like a sore thumb most of the time. What is driving your decision? Is it about you? Is it about your needs? Are you doing these things, saying these things, interacting this way, having this relationship because your needs, what you want? And if it's about you, then that's coming from ego. If it's about others, you're doing this because of others. And that can even be tricky because you can say, well, I need to manipulate these people for their own benefit, you see, but that's really about you and what you think they should be doing. That's not about them. It's about, they don't, so you'll help them out. You see, that's an ego thing. So it can be difficult to decide, where to draw the line. But if you try, just every little decision you make, tiny little decisions, just relating every day to people, to your spouse, to your children, to the people you work with, what's behind this? What's the root of it? And if you're doing it because of self, then you need to let that go. And actually, you can trace that back usually to a fear. You can say, well, what's the fear that makes me need it this way? Why do I, need this? Why is this why I'm trying to manipulate and nudge this to be a certain way? What's the fear behind it? And then once you find the fear, you've got the root, and then you need to rip out the fear and get rid of it. How do you rip out fear and get rid of it? The only antidote I know of for fear is courage. You have to, one, have a will to do it, and then a good strategy is to figure out what is the worst thing about this fear. If this fear, what I fear happens, what's the worst? And then accept the worst and say, okay, if that happens, I can deal with it. I'll live through it. I will deal with that, and life will go on, and that'll be okay. And once you get to that point where you accept the worst, then the fear no longer has any grip on you because you've already accepted the worst and you can deal with it. Then there's nothing, there's no reason then to keep trying to manipulate it to be someplace else because you've already accepted it and now you can just go on. So those are kind of some of the tricks of growing the quality of your consciousness, is to first look for the ego, then trace the ego back to the fear or to the belief, and then the belief to the fear, and then use courage to just outgrow them. Now, that's a thing that's easy to say and hard to do, and it takes time and patience. And I have any number of people who say, I didn't know I had any beliefs or fears. And they studied a little while just doing what I've said, and they are amazed that almost everything they do, every action they take and word they speak, is being moved and motivated by some belief or fear. And it just astounds them that they've been walking around all this time and didn't know that. And I think that that's the way it is for most of us.
Well, this has been very helpful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Tom, you've probably already answered much of my question in terms of bringing up ego, fear, beliefs. But the question was, during your experience in expanding your understanding of little c and big C consciousness, what were some of the challenges you faced or the doubts that blocked your way, and how did you overcome them?
Okay, that's an interesting question. The major doubt that I had in the very beginning was kind of the doubt, the doubt of a left brain scientist, right? Is it real?
Yeah.
That was the major doubt. Is it real? I'd been working with Bob Monroe for maybe 6, 8, 10 months a year, had all kinds of experiences out of body. We were healing, we were remote viewing, and we had collected a whole bunch of data, and the statistics of the data that we collected said it was real. People couldn't get this information, and we'd go check and see if it was right, something we remote viewed or something like that. And we had all these right answers. So the science would tell you this is not just random. There is something real going on here. But even though you had that's intellectual, and the major doubt remained: is this real, or is there something else going on? And the way that kind of resolved itself is that eventually I realized that my criteria for something to be real was the problem. Reality to many means of this reality frame, or worse, within my knowledge and understanding. But this reality frame and my understanding is only a limited subset. Many things are unknowns. Many things are paradox, and that's for science as well as everything else. There's lots of unknowns and paradoxes. So to say that if it's of this reality frame and if it's within my understanding, it's real. But if it's outside of my understanding, like I've never experienced it, it's outside of my experience, and it's not in this physical reality, then it's not real. But you realize that your knowledge and your understanding is very limited. It's not the whole thing. So then this idea of, well, is it real? So, well, what does real mean? There's lots of paradoxes in physics and unknowns and experiences that you've never had. You can't limit it like that. And then secondly, I realized that it doesn't really matter, whether it's real or not. Is it real is not a useful question. What's real turns out to be defined by a belief. Most of us allow physical reality to define what's real, but reality is bigger than physical reality. Love, compassion, truth, and joy are not physical, but they're more important to us generally as individuals than much of the physical stuff. Well, these things aren't physical and they're very important. So it's not physical doesn't mean like, well, it's not real, can't be important. We have lots of things that are non-physical that are very important. Individual consciousness and awareness are subjective and they're personal. Okay, we all walk around with our own, reality. Now the realities are shared in a sense, so we kind of agree on what the color red is, but we may not be seeing the same wavelength at all and calling it red. We've just memorized that this is what people call red, and we all may be seeing different shades of red. We don't know what other people see, right? We only know what we see. Yeah. Your awareness, your consciousness is all subjective. So we at the core, what's most important to us is not physical objectivity. The physical supplies only the form, not the content, the meaning, or the significance. So unfortunately, by defining real as physically objective, we cut ourselves off from the bigger picture, from the larger reality. So this whole question is it real, is really a poor question. You see, it's based on a belief of what we think is real from a limited subset of information and experience. Okay, and then we turn around and cut ourselves off from a bigger picture because, that can't be real. You see, so that's the problem with that. Okay. So how valuable is it to me? That's a much better question. What can I do with it? Those are more significant questions than is it real? How can it? How can I apply it? How does it interface with my information? My physical existence. How does it connect with that? These are important questions. How does it interface with my physical existence? That's a good question, but that's a very different question than, is it real? So that was my big thing to get over, was to forget about is it real? That's not important. It's not even a good question. Okay. It's a kind of red herring that traps people into a limited view because they can't go to where it's not real. And they don't understand that what they think is real is just a belief. So that's kind of, it's a misleading question based wholly on a mistaken limiting belief that misses the point. So that's kind of the summary of it. So, the way to overcome blocks is to realize that all blocks are generated by fear, ego, belief, expectations, and so on. And you eliminate the blocks by finding the fear and getting rid of it. So if you're blocked by this thing, if it's not real, I can't deal with it. Only spooky, crazy people, get into this stuff that's not real. Then you've just got a fear. You see, you're a fear that you might be considered spooky or crazy. Or crazy or something. Therefore, because of this fear, you've created a limitation and a block, and then you can't get beyond it. So that was probably the main thing, and that probably took me 6 months or a year to get past that is it real problem, because here I am, the physicist, right? And it's got to be real, or I don't want to deal with it.
Measure it somehow.
Yeah, you got to measure it, and then you realize, well, this stuff you measure really isn't really the meaningful stuff in life. And maybe we need to get by that because this seems to be very meaningful, so let's let that, is it real, go and, and get on with it. So that was one of the sticking points for me, a doubt that was in my way and blocked me for a while. There were some others, I get to some of those later. There's a question down at the end that I thought was really delightful, which, some of the major discoveries that kind of you made along the way. And right. Many of these will come up in the same question because they were things when suddenly I kind of let go of a limitation, let go of a belief or a fear. And then kind of you go, aha, it works like this. And so many of your discoveries and aha moments come just for this very reason. It's you drop a fear or a belief or an expectation, and suddenly the world gets bigger because the limitation goes away.
Yeah. You take yourself out of the equation, you look at the bigger picture and how does it fit together, get rid of your fears, overcome them, and then suddenly, you have another layer of the onion that you get to work your way down into or out into, as the case may be.
Yes. That's it exactly.
Let's not walk on stuff that's going to come up later on in our conversation. I did want to kind of move into a slightly different area in the physical material reality, in which the majority of those that are following along in their day-to-day lives, there appears to be little pursuit of higher consciousness, the non-physical material reality. And those in that majority just seem content with the achievement of the levels described in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for example. And sometimes just those lower levels therein, where they're not necessarily constrained to those lower levels. Since my big toe is about your journey, inadequately being described right here now in this question frame by me as moving above that Maslow model. What do you see as the impetus for those who are satisfied within the lower PMR to seek the next level if there is an impetus, or are they just not ready in their spiritual and consciousness evolution?
Okay, well, many people are simply not ready yet for a major breakthrough in understanding. Okay, they got too much ego, too much expectation, belief, fear, for them to take more than a half-hearted, faltering baby steps. Okay, they're simply collecting data and gaining experience. Okay, that's a lot of people fit into that. They're really not ready for major change. They have too much fear, too much ego, too many beliefs, too many expectations to make much progress. Another way of saying that is they're just very limited. They're very limited in what they can see. Their picture is small, and they can't see a bigger picture because of all the fear and beliefs, et cetera, that they have. So they're kind of stuck in a small box and just bouncing around, like you say, with Maslow's needs. They have shelter, they have food, they have all the basic necessities that meet their most obvious needs, and they can't see a world any bigger than that. So that's just where they are. Now, those who become ready, what happens if you start to become ready to take bigger steps, you become what I'd call a seeker. This isn't good enough anymore. You start looking for something more significant. It's a process.
Maslow's love is not an adequate love. There's something more.
Right. There's something more. Yeah. And you start seeing this. You get a little crack. And this process of becoming a seeker slowly pries open minds. It expands worldviews. Reality gets a little bigger. And as long as that seeking phase lasts, you have this kind of drive to grow up, to see a bigger picture, to connect in a way that's more satisfying, it's a deeper sort of thing. But it's often a very slow process, and sometimes it's intermittent. Sometimes you'll be a seeker for a while, and then you'll get into football, and because football season's coming up, and you forget about seeking for a while. So it's off and on. It comes and goes, but every time it comes around, you get a little further, and then the sessions that when the seeking is on last a little longer, and eventually you get to the point where seeking is the driver of your life. You want to know. You want to find truth. You want to see the bigger picture. You're very dissatisfied with the little picture being all there is. You're looking more for meaning. And serious seekers then are the ones that are making the progress, that are going up this consciousness evolution ladder. Those who aren't seeking, or who are seeking for a very small percentage of their time, they're just collecting data and kind of milling around, learning. Now they're still growing, but in very tiny little baby steps. And once they accumulate enough of those baby steps, they'll start to be a seeker for just a little bit of a time, and they'll look for something more. But it's a process that is painfully slow. So that's the way it is. It's unfortunate, but that's the way evolution works. Those that are ready get challenged and get things that help them grow up, and those that aren't just don't even notice. Life goes by, and they don't even understand the game that they're in.
Okay. No, I think that answers the question. If once you get excited as being a seeker, and you're trying to tell other people about this, get them excited about it, yet they're clinging to Einsteinian physics, and they're not prepared to move over to look at things from a quantum view. Their reality is just not ready to expand. So
it's just not. And the thing is, it's wrong to look at those people and say, oh, poor slobs, they're just they just don't know what they're doing, they're not ready yet, and to kind of look down at them and be condescending. That is wrong. They are just doing the best they can with the tools that they've got. They just don't, their tool just isn't quite as sharp, and they're just doing the best they can with what they've got. And what they've got is what they came in with, the level of the quality of their consciousness when they came here. They've got to start from there and go on. And That's the people who are seekers. They're doing the same thing. They just starting at a different point, but they get challenged and they're doing the best they can, with the tools and skills that they've got. So we just, everybody's in that same, doing the best they can with the level of skills that they've got to do it with. So if other people are challenging and kind of, living in a soap opera and don't seem to be making much progress, that's not something to look down on or to feel superior to. We're doing the same thing. We're just doing it at a different level of evolution, but it's the same thing. We're challenged, we're squirming around with the lessons, we're trying to learn this stuff, and it's difficult, and we're slugging along through it like walking through water. And we're having that same kind of experience as they are. We're just doing it different ways. And if you're a very, very grown person and you have lots of, quality of consciousness, you're still doing the same thing. You're still being challenged, but in a different way with different things. You no longer kick the dog. That's not a challenge anymore. You can live without hurting people, make yourself feel better, but you have your own challenges. So that's the better way to look at it, is that we're all pretty much just here to struggle, to learn, to grow up. And if you can be helpful to somebody else's process, that's a good thing to be.
Okay.
Tom,
yes.
I have a question about this. Wouldn't it be part of letting go of our expectations that they should be anything else other than they are?
Absolutely. The reason we get so frustrated and annoyed with people is because of our ego.
Yeah.
It's because of our beliefs and our ego and, that fear. And that creates the expectation, and the expectation makes us upset with them. If it wasn't for you guys, always wanting, war, or always wanting to control everything, life would be good. And that's the wrong thing. That's us trying to, wanting to manipulate them, or wanting them to be different, wanting them to be more like us. If you could just be more like me, the world would be a better place. That's just ego. And we need to realize they just are who they are, and we need to love them and try to help them see it. And if they just don't see it, well, we'll give it our best shot. Maybe next time they'll notice. And that's the nature of consciousness growth. It just has to happen individually and at its own rate.
And I think that that's one of our challenges, one of our lessons right now myself. I know it's been one for me anyway. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're speaking with Tom Campbell. Please help support him by visiting his websites, mybigtoe.com and mbtevents.com. And please consider purchasing a copy of his book, My Big Toe. Thereafter, you might consider attending one of his seminars or workshops as well. Expanding and growing your experience of consciousness about consciousness may help others become open to the larger reality that we're all a part of. Tom, as we continue our conversation here, we'd kind of like to shift gears a little bit and now look at things that would be growth-oriented, such as lowering entropy, expanding and growing love, and looking into healing areas. And for our first question in this topic area, I'd like to hand it over to Uranus.
Tom, although it seems that in our PMR, our physical material reality, polarities seem to be, for me, a major tool for generating opportunities for us to learn, sort of like having experienced injustice, it propels us to seek justice, or having experienced fear or lack of love, it propels us to seek love. Is it enough to just seek the opposite of what we have been having a negative experience of, like the opposite being like to seek out love? Or is the point of this lesson a deeper invitation to us to say, be that which we seek, such as justice or love?
Well, I couldn't have answered that question any better than you did there. That's perfect. Yes. The key is to be, what did Gandhi say? Be the change that you wish to see. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly right. If you seek something out, if you seek out love, you'll probably never find it, you see, because that's the wrong approach. seeking something out is an intellectual process. And in an intellectual process to seek something out, you are probably going to miss the point and not really find what you're looking for. The point is you don't have to seek out love. What you have to do is get rid of the fear and the ego, and there is love. Love will just be there. You see,
so this is a challenge then to face our ego and our fears.
Absolutely. If you take a being, take away their fear, which means their ego, their beliefs, get rid of all that junk. What do you have left is love. You see? Now you'll have a being of love. So it's not that you seek out love or seek out justice or seek these things. That's an intellectual process. And it tends to be a manipulative process eventually, because when you seek it out, then you want to make it happen. And when you make it happen, you have to manipulate it into being. And all of this is just ego and fear. You're doing it because you fear you don't have it. You fear you need it. You want it. You see, it's about you. And going after it in that way is counterproductive. And it's one of those things that the harder you chase it, the less likely you are to catch it. Yeah. It always seems to just elude your grip. You want this love and it never quite happens. Well, that's because you're trying to catch it and chase it and put it in a bottle and make it yours. Instead, you just need to get rid of the fear, get rid of the the expectations, the needs, the wants, the beliefs, and what you'll have left is love. And it'll just come to you. You will be it. And yes, so the way that you find love is to get rid of the fear, get rid of the things that block it, and and limit it. That's the key. Not to try to chase it down and if you wrestle it to the ground, you get to keep it. It's not that sort of thing at all. It's you have to make yourself to where you're worthy of it, and it just comes to you when you are. You see, you don't have to go get it.
Yeah. And didn't we set up these lessons in the first place anyway?
Many of us did. We set them up, but the way this world works is no matter what situations occur to you, whether rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief. I guess that was the old rhyme. It doesn't really matter where you land in this socioeconomic strata. You have challenges wherever it is. There are growth challenges. So we do tend to set some things up, but usually only in a very general way, because we're challenged everywhere. Yeah. Everything that happens to us in a day, we make thousands of decisions and choices every day, and we make them based on fear and ego, or we make them based on love. And by making those choices better, we start to move one way or the other. And as we get rid of the fear and ego, our life becomes more joyful, more love, more, it's more satisfying. It becomes a really happy, productive, wonderful experience, rather than a frustrating, why can't something good ever happen to me kind of feel sorry for yourself experience.
Yeah, the self-pity route.
Yeah, the self-pity. See, that doesn't take you anywhere. And if you're feeling sorry for yourself, and that's why you're chasing after things, you say, oh, woe is me, I never get any of the good stuff, and so on, then you don't get there, because you're the problem. You are what's blocking you from getting there. So first, look at yourself and say, where's the ego? What are my choices telling me about me? Are they about me? Am I trying to get things the way I want them? And why is that? What fear is driving me to do that? Then get rid of the fear. That's the way to attack the problem. So yes, there are polarities, and part of that is just our language. If you define hot, then you have to, there's also not hot, right?
Right.
Or if you define anything, you define X, then there's not X. So polarities are just a fact of language. Any thing that any noun or adjective or whatever, any words you can come up with, there's a not that word, which means the opposite of that word. So polarities, there's nothing really magic about that. It's just it's language and words. Yeah. There is there is a polarity for everything. So it's not like there's a mystical something about polarities. It's just the nature of language that there are polarities. Because anything that there is, then there's the opposite of that. And you don't want to. We can use polarities as with your opening, to see, the other side. So, it's useful for somebody maybe who has always grown up with plenty to see, how somebody that lives in Biafra lives. Maybe that would be a very instructive vacation, to go to some place where people were starving and just see how the world is, rather than the happy little place, the cornucopia of everything you want kind of world that you've always been in. Yes, those kinds of things might be helpful, just to kind of let you know that, the world isn't just as you have, experienced it. There's a bigger world out there, and it encompasses all sorts of things, and that may help us grow. We see people who hate, we see people who love, we see all sorts of things, and it should become obvious to us that the people who hate and are frustrated are not very happy. They're not having a good time. That should be obvious. And from that we should learn something, but hardly anybody does. We look at that and we say, yeah, they're miserable people, but that's because they don't have it like this. This is the way it needs to be, and we fall into the same trap, rather than just letting it be as it is and seeing if we can't be useful and helpful to the process.
Yeah. Well, you talk about pull up your bootstraps all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Is pull up your bootstraps the stick to the carrot called love?
Well, yeah, in a way it is, because if you do pull yourself up by your bootstraps, then your life gets more and more pleasant. So you can think of it that way, that the pulling up your bootstraps is the hard work you have to do to get that carrot, which is a sublime place to be. But it's not, that's kind of you can make that metaphor, but basically, if the reason you're pulling up on your bootstraps is because you want to get that sublime place, you're already got the wrong motivation. You want to pull yourself up by the bootstraps just because it's right. It's just the right thing to do. You want to grow up. You want to become love. You want to be helpful. You want to be moral. You want to do those things just because it's the right thing. It's the way to be. And then you let the rest of it happen the way it happens. So if you're trying to manipulate a result, you're already starting on the wrong foot, trying to do the wrong thing, and you're going to get frustrated because it never seems to quite happen. Well, I've been working on this, I've been trying to do this. Every time I see a little old lady, I try to help her cross the street whether she wants to go or not. It's this sort of thing. You keep trying, but it doesn't seem to help. And that's because you got the focus wrong. You want to do it just because it's the right thing to do. And then the love and the joy and all that stuff is not a goal to reach, but a result of a life well lived. You see, it's a result of doing things for the right reason, having good intent for right reason. The result is this love and joy and peace that you find. If you try to go after that love and joy and peace, you just create barriers that keep you from ever getting there.
Yeah, that sounds so true to me. It feels so true. And I appreciate
so obvious and easy to say, so hard to do, huh?
Oh, yes. That's why I think I need a few more lifetimes. Keep plugging away at it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, Tom, given that our purpose is to lower entropy and increase love within a quality consciousness, how does a person giving more attention to the various realities they live in the data stream, and that person gaining experience to know that this is a virtual reality, actually lead to more love and less entropy in the little consciousness for that person? More pointedly, does it directly lead to a person operating with love?
Well, it can. And surprisingly enough, many times it does. But only if you are successful and don't get stuck, lost, or plateaued out. To be continually successful, continually moving, making progress, evolving, continuously growing, and significantly increasing the quality of your consciousness, one must drop fear and ego and become one with the larger conscious system. Okay, so that's the process. You have to do that. thus becoming love, can be an unintentional byproduct of exploring the larger consciousness system, but it doesn't have to be. So that's not a prescription that will get you there, but it's just one of the paths that you can take. So just going out and exploring the larger consciousness system won't make you grow up one bit if you don't, if you don't drop your fear and drop your ego and grow up. Yeah. So we have people who do out of body or do remote viewing, and they still, haven't evolved the quality of their consciousness very much, but they've learned techniques and they've practiced and they can accomplish things, but it's of no larger value to them. And they might as well be, buying tickets and going to, Six Flags or some amusement park and going on roller coasters and having a good time. That's kind of the way their out of body is for them. It's a good time. It's something to do, and it's not really growing, but it can be growing, because if you see how the big picture works, how the larger reality is constructed and what it means, and if you interact there and you're open to growing, you will grow, because it increases the size of your reality. It increases the size of your decision space. It's just like your world view grows if you don't just stay in the same town that you were born in, right? Travel, going out and just seeing things. And it's not that you go to Paris and London and Tokyo and these places, to play and have a good time, but just going there, just being exposed to the rest of the world, some mysterious way, enlarges your reality, makes you less narrow and less narrow-minded. It kind of opens you up, gives you perspective, and that's what the exploration of the larger conscious system can do. It can just open you up some, give you perspective, just like being well-traveled. And if you take that perspective and learn and grow from it, then it can be very helpful. But there are people who fly around the world and see a lot of things, and they don't grow up a bit. It doesn't do that for them. They don't come back with kind of a bigger picture of existence. They come back with how where is it you can go to eat in this restaurant or that restaurant, and they miss the whole point of becoming connected to a larger culture.
Focusing on activities rather than working with the intent that would form those activities that could benefit. Yeah, because of the feedback mechanism.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing. So yes, this stuff, buzzing around in the larger consciousness system can be very growing, but it can also be beside the point. It really doesn't matter. And a path of exploring the non-physical is not necessary to becoming evolved, to becoming one with the larger consciousness system. Some people do that without having any idea there's a non-physical reality. They just, I would think, idea comes to mind would be maybe Mother Teresa, right? She isn't renowned for her out of body and remote viewing, skills. She just cared about people. She just knew it was right to help people, whether, their government or anybody else thought it was a good idea or not. You just help them because they're there and they need your help. So just with that attitude, you see, she could grow up a whole lot, and exploring the larger conscious system wasn't necessary. It didn't have to be a part of that process. And there she was inside an organization that's full of limitations, but she didn't let any of those limitations, constrict her. She went out and did what was right.
Right. And it sounds like she actually lived in accordance with her particular viewpoint of a larger consciousness.
Yes. So you see, you don't have to, this larger consciousness system exploring is not necessary, but it is just another way to help open your mind, but it's not the only path.
So it almost sounds like if you're sensitive to the feedback mechanism that you have within your relationships with people and work with that feedback mechanism, then you may grow at a faster rate, possibly, or a more comprehensive rate.
Yes, absolutely. That's all it takes. Really, what's required is for you to be aware, you need to have some kind of drive to grow. You have to be a seeker. You have to want, to grow up. And then you just have to take the time to look at who you are and what you're doing and what your motivations are. And then when you find the ego and the fear and the belief, you have to do the hard work to get rid of them. And what's left over is love, and you start growing and evolving. And of course, the more you grow, the easier it is to grow more. It's one of those things like the snowball rolling down the hill. It gets easier and easier and more effective and more efficient as you grow. So in the beginning, it's painfully slow and draggy, but it gets quicker and easier every step.
So you just have to look underneath the bed and chase those monsters out. Huh?
That's it. You got to find them and then get rid of them.
Well, that's how do you do that? I mean, other than facing it with courage, I mean, developing courage sounds like a prerequisite for conscious growth.
It is, and that courage comes from a will and intent to do it. If you really focus on it, if you have an intent and you put, some of your focus and some of your intent just every day that you want to accomplish this, you want to evolve, you want to grow up, you want to become love, and if that's a focus, it will just begin to happen. And if you're just aware of your surroundings, they say live in the moment. Well, what living in the moment does for you is it makes you aware of your surroundings, of other people, of your of relationships, of the quality of things. Start to notice, how do you interact with people? Because we all, we interact with ego all the time and we don't notice it. If somebody says, well, did you react with any ego today? You'd go, well, I don't think so. I don't remember any time like that, but you probably did 100 times.
Sure.
That's just the way we are. So you need to first become aware and notice it. All the details, all the little decisions you make, you got to question why, particularly the ones that don't work out well, where you feel angry, where you feel upset, where you feel frustrated. Why? Why did you feel angry? Why did you feel upset or frustrated? And you will find a fear. You will find an expectation, a need. You try to manipulate something or you want it to be a certain way and it's not that way, and that upsets you or frustrates you. Well, what's the problem? You think the problem is that those other people aren't doing it the way they should. And really the problem is that you have an expectation and a need for them to be a certain way that they're not. You see? So you have to let them be how they are. And as you see these things, one of them, the first two or three you see are a little harder to find. And after that, they start pouring out and you realize that there's so much of it. Then you start working on it and just letting that go. Say, well, my thinking that this person ought to be this way, should do those things, should give me that raise, should recognize my contribution, etc. And you realize, well, that's all about me. It's my needs and my wants and whatever. Everything's about me. I'm the center of my own universe. And then get out of that, say, well, about other people? Let's make it about them. What's that person, the person that's not doing what I want? Why are they not doing what I want? And not just because they're stupid or they don't get it, where are they? Where are they coming from? What's their reality like? Why do they do the things they do? And then maybe you could help them grow to a point where they can see a bigger reality, if that's kind of the problem. But to just push them and nudge them and try to manipulate them to something is just counterproductive. It doesn't work.
Right.
Even a dog, and dogs are the most accommodating creatures on this planet. They'll let you do anything to them and they still love you. But if you sit down with your dog and you put your hand against his side and push him, what will that dog do? He'll push back.
You betcha.
He'll push back is what he'll do. And it's not that he says, oh, that person's trying to make me go to the right and I don't want to do that. It's just instinctive. He just pushes back because you're pushing him. Right. And if he knew you really wanted him to step, to the right, he'd probably do it. Mm-hmm. But it's not that the dog, really doesn't want to do that and doesn't want to please you. It's just the instinctual thing is to push back. So here's somebody and they're not being the way you want, and you push at them, they push back. And all you've done is hardened their attitude and made it worse. You see?
Yeah, so when I did that with a dog when I was growing up, I would push on the other side, and he would go to that hand away from me. And so uh, in interacting with others and feeling a desire to help, feeling seeing an opportunity where one may help. You just have to phrase it in a manner that is going to be amenable to who you're pitching it at, I would imagine.
Exactly. Communications, if you want to communicate with somebody rather than just lecture them, if you want to communicate with them, you have to understand where they are, what their reality looks like from behind their eyes, and then give them, not tell them what to do or, well, I'll help you out here. I'll explain what
Sure.
you should do next.
Sure.
But you give them options. Well, have you thought about this? And what about that? Look, here's 3 different ways you can approach that. Let them look at it. And 2 of them may have been poor ways and 1 may have been a good way. So you can just say, here's some options. Here's some other ways to think about it. Here's some of the, the logical consequences of these. And, good luck. Have a good day. And then let them go. And if they get the sense that you're trying to manipulate them, they'll still push back. But if
Sure.
they get the sense that you're trying to help them, and why would they get that sense? Because you really are trying to help them and not trying to manipulate them, you see?
Yeah.
It's not that you're just being tricky and are making them think that you're trying to help them and you're really trying to manipulate them. That's not good either. But if you're really trying to help them, you're just going to do things that they can digest, that they can understand. You can't force feed or you can't make anybody do anything they don't want to do. You can help them, though, by giving them alternatives, explaining things. Just sometimes you can help them just by encouraging them, just by being there. I know this is a struggle. I hope you make a good choice. Good luck, and I'm here with you. That kind of thing is sometimes all they need. Just a little encouragement to stretch out and make the choice. So, yeah, you have to understand where the person is and then take it from there, a small step, just a small step. And then after they've made that small step, you can point out another small step. And eventually, if those small steps work out, they'll be eager for your advice because you've just helped them, take a few small steps. But if what you're doing is manipulating them in a way that's good for you, they will not believe anything you tell them anymore. So
Right.
that's communication. Starts with understanding the person you're trying to communicate to, not giving them a lecture of, but you understand the way things should be, because that hardly does anybody any good.
Right. You're probably better off saying, well, this is how it's worked for me. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
Tom, what about people that are so fearful because of their experiences in life that any type of reaching out, or even if you meet them where they are and it's even just sitting with them in silence is too much for them? Do you have any suggestions?
Yes, there are some people that you just can't help. There's just nothing you can do that's going to help because they, maybe they're sunk, very deeply in self-pity, or maybe whatever. Doesn't matter. Maybe they have so much fear that they just can't let go of it. And you should try to help them. Try this, and if that doesn't work, try that. And if that doesn't work, try something else. And if that doesn't work, then you may come to the conclusion that really nothing's going to work. They're just not ready yet. And if they're not ready and you can't push, then leave them to themselves. Give them whatever things you think might be helpful in the future. Here's some things maybe you could think about, and then just leave them alone. Yeah. And if it's somebody that you can't leave alone because it's a coworker or a boss or a spouse or a child or somebody like that, and it's not like you can just walk away and not see them again, then you need to just let that part of that contention go and figure that's just the way it is. And if they flame out and burn because of it, then that's the road they're on, and you have to let that happen because they'll learn from it.
But could letting that go actually be healing?
It could. It could be. It depends. If let's say you're codependent with them, then letting them go would be very, very hard. But you have to say, I'm here on my path doing my thing, and you're on your path doing your thing. We're connected in some way. Maybe you live in my house, or maybe you're the guy that sits next to me at work. So we need to get along. So you do what you need to get along, and that part that seems to be the sticking part, just let it go. Ignore it. Don't go there. And if that means that person that sits next to you, does whatever, and it annoys you, you have to learn not to be annoyed by it. You have to just accept it and figure that's the way they are, and I have to learn just to live with that and not take it personally, not make it, my problem. So that means you get rid of your fear, your connection to it. Don't be connected to it with ego. Get disconnected from it and let them be. Let them be there, let them go down that path, even if it takes them to destruction, because that's probably what they need before they can turn around and do anything else. So, it's like people with illnesses that they need. Sometimes when you heal people, you realize that they really don't want to be healed, and they really don't need to be healed, in the sense that this illness is something important to their learning process. And to go in and heal them is an interference. So, and even if that's somebody you care about and love, you see, you have to let that go. You can't say, well, I don't want that. Well, that's ego. You don't want it, but they may need it. And again, that's easier if you get a bigger picture. If we say, well, they may die, or they may, they get a disease. They may, some real terrible problem may happen to them if I don't step in. Well, terrible problems happen. People die, and then they come back and try it again. It's not that dying thing, is not really that big a deal. It's just, okay, this one didn't work out. It got dead-ended. Well, maybe it's time to try it again, you see? So we have to take the bigger picture.
Yeah, and do people take on illnesses or accidents or whatever to help those around them?
They can. That could happen. Sometimes they don't just take them on, they create them. Sometimes, a life of anxiety can create illnesses. Well, the illness is a feedback, and the feedback says you need to deal with this anxiety issue, or it's going to kill you. So you don't want to take that feedback away, because maybe that will be their breakthrough to deal with that problem. And if you take it away, now they're right back where they were, struggling with that, you see.
Yeah, and I was thinking in family units, I've seen so often a family that has lots of problems, and one person will become sick or have an accident, and it challenges everybody else in the family to reevaluate. And so I just kind of thought that might be something that was at play going on.
Yes, it very well could be. It could be that then creates a challenge for them to do better, for them to reassess the problem. Is this little stuff that we're constantly picking at, how important is that, in a bigger picture? And suddenly they can forget that when somebody's in mortal danger, where it was very important, otherwise. And that might be a growing thing. Everything that happens has a potential for us to grow. I mean, that's the neat thing about it, you see. And if you have this attitude that everything that happens is a challenge for you to grow, then how can anything bad happen to you? You see, no matter how miserable or uncomfortable it is, you can say, wow, what a great chance to learn. What a great chance to learn patience, or learn to, to deal with pain, or to whatever. You can learn from everything. There are people who have automobile accidents, sever a spine, and they become quadriplegic. Some of them get sunk in self-pity and don't live very long, and some of them just come right back and are an inspiration to everybody because of the way they accept and deal with it. That's the thing. So you can look at life and you can say, wow, it sucks. Look at all the stuff that happens to me and to my family and Or you can say, wow, what a ride. This is great. I have all these opportunities and challenges to learn. So just because of that change in attitude, your life now is no longer frustrating and awful. It's exciting and challenging.
Love it. Love it.
See, and nothing really changed except you. And you let go of the ego, and you started seeing things, as they are, rather than as projected through your ego. So that's how life can be full of joy, And you wonder, well, how could life be full of joy? Suddenly you just walk around winning lotteries and, everybody comes up and, kisses you. And it's not like that. It's just that life becomes wonderful because you're not struggling with it anymore. You're enjoying it. You become a part of it. You kind of integrate with it, and it's all fun. And when you don't need those hits between the eyes with the 2x4 to wake you up, you generally don't get many of them.
Yeah. Thank you. I love it. I'm starting to call them my delicious disciplines, so thank you.
Okay.
Tom, you talked about medical illness and that we can create our own trauma based on the manner in which we approach life. Can you talk about how, in trying to deal with illnesses, how it can be nudged towards healing because of probability for progress is unknown? It seems to infer that a person should not go to the doctor and get a diagnosis, and especially no medical diagnostics that provide data like imaging or clinical pathology results. That way there's no data rendered for the illness, and positive thinking has more chance of working. And you've already answered that. And it's part of a go ahead.
That's a good question, and a lot of people ask that. Does that mean you shouldn't go to the doctor? You should just use your mind to heal it, because as soon as the doctor does a test, and now suddenly the data is there confirming this, now it's a lot harder to get rid of because the uncertainty's been reduced, and that's true. But I do not encourage people to forego such tests. I encourage them to first make the test unnecessary because of the way they live and think and be, and the kind of positive person they are. Secondly, if that fails, work on the problem at first notice, before it gets to be an issue serious enough to, have a doctor tell you have to go to have a test. Okay. Right. So that's, you have those two things. Then you need to apply as much healing energy to the problem as you can before the test takes place. Okay, so if you do all that, if you make it unnecessary, then you never get to that point where you have that kind of problem,
right?
Because you've gotten rid of the fear and the ego and the things that tend to make us ill in the first place. So that's one way. But then when you start getting a lump someplace, you probably have that lump for a month or two before you decide, well, I think maybe I ought to go have a doctor check that out. You see, well, as soon as you notice it, you ought to start working on it right away. Not, well, let's see if it gets worse. Is what most of us do. Let's just watch it for a while and see if it gets bigger or gets harder or something. So start working at it immediately. And if you get to a doc and a doc notices something and says, I think you ought to go have the biopsy done on that. Well, right then you ought to get real serious about putting a lot of energy into it before that biopsy takes place. Things won't take long to change. You can change something very quickly if you, with your mind. It doesn't have to be a real slow process. So that's, you need to do all that first. But because one may not have the power to modify probability as much as may be required, for healing, and because the larger conscious system may have developed another plan, like, that sickness may be something you need for a growth step, then you don't know about those. So you need to go have the test. Because you may not have enough, because of the things that have happened to you. Let's say you didn't know it, but one day you were walking down the street and a store was cleaning out old stuff and you got a big whiff of asbestos and you have no idea that happened to you. Well, that then irritates your body and you may end up then with a cancer. And because of that, the probability of getting that cancer may be very high, you see. And it may take a lot of modifying of the probability to get that to go away. And you may not have the ability to modify it that much. Well, then you need to go get it checked and maybe get it taken care of in some other ways, you see. So you don't know. So I don't encourage people to forego tests like that. I encourage them, one, to make them unnecessary, and two, work on them as soon as they get idea there might be an issue, and 3, particularly when they're told to take the test usually doesn't happen like the next minute. Usually
Sure.
it's like next week or next month or something that it gets scheduled. And during that time, you just need to be real serious about not only working on it, but seeing if you can find the cause. Why am I, this is, is this a fear related? Is this something that's on my path to learn? And if so, well, now's the time to learn it, before you have to have a tumor in order to learn it. It's like, well, what is this? What's the origin here? And particularly if you're a meditator, you can kind of get into that still state and find out the origins of this thing. You may fix it before it ever has to occur, in which case then it'll just go away. So
Yes.
it's not just forcing it to go away. Think first about how can I change myself such that this doesn't have to be on my path. This doesn't have to be a challenge for me. I can learn without it. That's the better attitude than I'm going to use my mind to force this thing to go away. But, I don't have to change. Nothing wrong with me. I'm just fine the way I am. I've got this lump and I need to force it to go away, or get somebody else that can do these things to force it to go away for me. That's like, the head in the sand, and you're not really looking at the big picture. You should first
Right.
think about, what can I do differently? Can I eat differently? Can I live differently? What can I do about this?
Yeah, that's the feedback mechanism again.
Right.
I mean, it's paying attention to your environment of consciousness, not necessarily the PMR, but that state that you are coming from in order to view it.
Yes,
And
exactly.
That's a hard thing to hold until you get a taste of it, and then you can develop that. It
Yes,
seems.
that's right. And this feedback usually comes in the beginning with kind of light strokes. You get little nudges and little things, and you ignore those. And then the strokes get a little heavier, and you ignore those. Eventually, you get hit between the eyes with a 2x4 to get your attention. You see, and then it's like, huh? What's
Yeah.
going on here? But if you think about it, there's all these other little nudges and taps and so on that are coming, time and time and time again, and you're just blowing them off and ignoring them. But if you get aware of those, then that gets us to the best step. You fix things before it's necessary to get hit by that 2x4. You don't have those problems. You never
Yeah.
develop them because there's never any need for you to develop them.
Because you're taking things and dealing with them as they come up rather than stuffing them somewhere.
Exactly.
They're likely to split the seams.
Right. Now that's all things, all illnesses aren't like that. You don't create all your illnesses. You probably create most of them, but sometimes it's just bad luck. You just happen to grab hold of something that somebody who had, the flu grabbed hold of just a minute before you took hold of it. And now you got it, and then you stick your finger in your mouth or rub your eyes or something, and then you get
Sure.
the flu. Well, that's not because you deserve the flu because you haven't been paying attention to your lessons. That's just, stuff happens and you deal with it. That's so everything isn't programmed like that, and it's not all feedback. Some of it is just the way it happens, and there may be a little feedback in there. Well, how's your immune system doing? What kind of nutrition and how do you eat, and what are the things that affect that immune system? There's still some things to learn from it.
Sure.
But some things are just random events.
And that's got to be factored in with your pathway, I guess. When you take this type of development on, you have to be able to continue to roll with the choices that you make, I guess.
Yes, but you see, if you don't have that fear and ego, then being ready to roll is just natural. That's the way you go through life. You just roll, and you just end up wherever it is you need to be, just at the time you need to be there. It works out real well. You're not trying to force your way, to a goal. You're just interacting. You're just kind of moving with the flow, interacting with what happens, learning, growing, doing things right for the right reasons, and it all kind of fits together into one dance with life that is, very, very nice.
Thank you. That definitely has given me quite a bit more to think about.
Tom, unfortunately, Keely has Skype problems. She wanted to know regarding healing, is it possible to move an organ that is out of position, such as the uterus, up to and including correcting the original placement, or only to that point?
Yes, almost everything is possible. There's very little that is impossible. However, depending on the situation and the individual, it may be more or less likely. Okay. So it depends on whether or not, that is needed. That's part of your path, whether or not that's part of your feedback, whether or not you have enough focus to, to make a difference that's big enough to change the outcome. So it depends on all kinds of things. So definitely it's possible.
And what would be the
something like an organ in position, there's a lot of uncertainty there. So that's something that is probably fairly easy to change in the sense that there's so much uncertainty. But it still depends on the situation and the individual. So possible, of course. Likely, depends.
Yeah. Well, what would be the ideal state of mind of the person then that might need this type of healing?
Well,
to make it most effective.
Yeah, first they would hopefully have to relate to the problem that they had without a lot of fear, because the fear would get in their way. They would have to relate to it in a detached way, not with ego, because that would be noise that would get in the way. Then they would have to be able to focus on it with a clear mind that didn't have a lot of thoughts running through it. You see, you couldn't have a lot of, that's why I say you have to be detached, because if it's, this thing, I need to fix it, and it's something that's worrying you, and you've got all this churning going on, then that's just noise. So you can't do that. So you need to be detached. You need to just clear your mind, and then put your intent out there for that describes the outcome, what it is you want to do. And if you want to use tools like light beams or, get your non-physical arms and put it where it's supposed to be and strap it in at that spot so it doesn't move. If you want to do all these things, they're just tools. You can do all that. It makes really no difference. Or if you just want it to be, to be in a healthy state, so it has no long-term negative consequences, and you may just say that. So whatever suits you, kind of whatever's the most suitable thing for a person, they could just get into that state and they say, okay, I've got this organ and it doesn't seem to be quite right, and I'm having these problems. I'd like that organ to be in its optimum position, where my body and my future and my health will be, where it's best, where we optimize what's best for me in that way. And then it'll do that. Now, maybe what's best for you is that you have this problem and have to deal with it, in which case it'll stay. So you see, that's a possibility as well. But the thing that's more difficult for people working on themselves is to be effective, you need to be detached from it. If you're not detached, then you have a lot of noise in it. You have, again, it's the same reason doctors don't operate on their children and their wives. If you're not detached, you have a lot of noise going on that degrades your ability to perform.
Yeah, well, that's understandable. So not to have, again, any expectations of it.
Right. No expectation. You just do it, and you put the energy there, and you do it in a way that it's okay. However it works out, it's okay. I'll deal with it. Yeah. But I would like it to work out, such that, my health is good. So I wanted to, I want to change it. I want to raise the probability of good health, and, like Spock says, live long and prosper, right? That's what you're trying to encourage. And that's the kind I want to raise the probability on live long and prosper, and lower the probability on any other outcome. So that's one way to look at it. Another way would be I'd like to raise the probability on it being however it is that I will gain, the most value from it. And that could allow it to be, it could be a physical problem, or even could kill you or not. then not second guess it. Say, okay, and whatever it is, I'll deal with it that way. So there's lots of ways to approach the problem. Or you could get very specific and say, well, okay, it's a uterus and it's slipped down. It needs to go up 5 centimeters and to the right 2 centimeters, and that's where I want it. And then you could work on placing it exactly in that spot. You see, now that's a very specific sort of thing. So you could work on any of those ways, and you should come to what's the best way to do that by your own intuition. And the best way to then get in touch with your intuition is just go in a meditation state and open up the thing. I have this thing, what should I do? What is the right course of action? And then just wait and see what comes to you, and get in touch with your intuition, and then approach it that way. So there's lots of ways to approach the problem, and different people in different situations should approach it, in a way that suits them. But they just, if they say, well, I'm going to do this, but I'm not sure that that's right, I'm going to try it for a while and see what happens. If not, I'll do so. See, if they have that kind of attitude where that's not being focused. That's being kind of all over the place, and that is very ineffective. And that's the way most people are, you see. Yeah. They're not detached. So it's to let it go, accept it however it comes out, and try to modify the probabilities that you think would best suit you and your growth. And what you're doing is just kind of taking charge of your life and trying to make it come out a way that's better for you.
Well,
that's fine, and that's the way it'll work.
That's very helpful. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I've really been enjoying our conversation here, Tom. None of us want it to end, but it seems that we're moving in towards some of our closing questions. And so I'm going to flip it back over to Uranus Rising so that we can begin to wrap up our conversation this evening.
Okay.
Well, we have to talk about the future, Tom.
Many
people are predicting a big change in the future, and so much around.
The good news is we won't have to be talking about 2012 too much longer.
I can't wait. I'm so sick of it. Anyway, much of it's around collapse and catastrophe. Well, how important is it to have some idea of future probabilities in the database? Do we need to know the future? Does anticipation, and maybe that's even an intention of such events, actually help manifest them?
Yes, the answer to the first one is no, and the second one is yes. No, we don't really need to know the future. Knowing the future generally has very little value to it. The way this reality system works is that stuff happens and we have to deal with it. And the way we deal with it, the quality with which we deal with it, will nudge us to either evolve or de-evolve. And that's kind of that's the game we're in. Okay, stuff happens and we get to deal with it, and how we deal with it determines whether we evolve or don't. So in that game, knowing the future really doesn't play out as very important. What you want to do is just let the stuff happen and deal with it. If you start trying to manipulate the future so it's always the way you want it, then you're basically getting in the way of your opportunities. You're getting in the way of your game. You're starting to manipulate the challenges and the things that happen to you for your own growth. And how do you manipulate them? Well, you turn them all into plain vanilla. So you don't have any challenges. You say, well, I don't need any challenges. I just want it to all be sweet and happy. Well, if you can manipulate it all sweet and happy, what have you done? You've just taken away your best chances to grow up, to change, to evolve. So the thing to do is just let the future roll out the way it does. And don't worry about it. Don't try to manipulate it. Don't necessarily even plan a whole lot for it. I mean, we have to plan some. We know that, next month we'll have a mortgage payment and we have to plan for it. So, it's not that you can just, go, float and not pay attention to anything. You still have to pay attention to business, but don't live in the future. Don't try to manipulate the future to be the way you want it. That's just not useful. It's not what life's about. So that's the no. And the yes, one was, see, what was that second half?
It was by anticipating these catastrophes.
Oh, yeah.
And
Do we help bring them about? Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So you got, 500,000 people who are all putting energy into, earthquakes and tidal waves in 2012. That helps the idea of earthquakes and tidal waves in 2012 to come about, because you have a lot of people who see that as a future. And the more they see that, and the more they think about it, and the more they fear that, the more likely it is to happen. We do create particularly what we fear, because our fears tend to be kind of high energy thoughts, if you will. And we tend to make our fears come true. No matter what you fear, if you have a lot of fear about it, you will probably manifest that fear as reality. So you have a parent, they're afraid that their children will be drug users, so they don't let their children out of the house or out of their sight. You don't let them date. You don't let them do anything. And what do? You drive them to be drug users. You see, you act in a way, if you have a big fear, to make that fear come true. So you're afraid that people won't like you. And because you have such a fear that they won't like you, it makes you kind of act with a lot of bluster and BS and bragging and these things. And what does that do? It makes people not like you, you see?
Yeah.
So it's just like that. When we have a fear, we create that fear happening.
Yeah.
And that works for us as individuals and for us as groups. So we have group fear, like the 2012 stuff, is very non-productive. And on the other hand, it works the other way. If there's a whole lot of people really want more peace in the world, that helps too.
Yeah.
So the things that we do with our minds help create the reality that we have. And we can, if when we look at the news at night and read the newspaper and kind of see what's going on around the world, and if that's depressing, well, that's a very honest depiction of who we are as a species, as a people.
Yeah, it sure
is. That's the way humans are. That's a very accurate display of the average level of consciousness quality in humanity at this time. Just look out in the world, and there we are. You see? So why is it like that? Well, because you have, a billion people or so putting energy into it being that way.
Yeah.
So that's the way it is. Definitely we cause things like that to happen. We create the future because of our fears, and also like we say, you help if it's not fears. If because of our love, we create a better future.
Yeah. Well, I remember in one of your slides in your talks, you had a graph on future probabilities, and you were saying the closer you get to them, and there's more energy, so to speak, going into them. These future probabilities become more possible. But I also wanted to know, how do factors such as uncertainty principles and making better choices, even as we approach the moment of that probability in the database, do those have any influence, and how great of an influence?
Sure. Well, the more uncertainty there is in a probability basically means that the probability isn't too settled yet. It can change. There's lots of uncertainty. So if there's a lot of uncertainty, then it could be higher, it could be lower. It's not really, evolving to any particular result. And in that case, your ability to change it is much greater, because there's not a lot of resistance to change. You could move it all over, and it doesn't really make much difference because it's not too well defined yet. You see, on the other hand, if you have something that, 5 doctors have biopsied your lump, and every one of them says that it's a deadly cancer, and now you want to change it, you see, now there's very little uncertainty what that lump is. And it takes a whole lot more effort and a whole lot more energy to make that cancer disappear. It's not impossible. It can still disappear, but it's a lot harder than it was when it was just this funny lump. I wonder what it is. In a few months, if it's not better, I'll go see a doctor. At that point, that lump could be anything. It could be a cyst. It could be, fibrosis. It could be, who knows? It could be a little infection under the skin. There's all sorts of things could be that lump. Could be I don't know, other examples of biology making lumps that aren't important. So then's the time to put your effort on that, because now the probability is wide. It's not so peaked. And at that point, you can change it without nearly so much power having to go into it. So yes, the amount of uncertainty around something is basically gives us leeway, because we can only change things within the natural uncertainty of those things. You know, we're not going, we can't change things where that are already done, or things that have no uncertainty. You know, this is going to happen, you know, because of that, this is going to happen. And when we want to go in and say, oh, we'd like to change that so it doesn't happen, that's not easy. You see, now you are trying to basically override the rule set, and that's a tough nut to crack. But where the rule set hasn't yet said anything about it being one way or another, that's a lot of room for manipulation there.
Yeah. Well, taking it back to this 2012 phenomena, I mean, there seems like so many people are spurting out certainties. This and that is going to happen. And I wonder about, why do these people need to be so precise and to be determined to know the future? I mean, living in uncertainty or in unknowing seems the most helpful thing. So I'm quite perplexed by this.
Yes, well, that's their fear, you know, and they have a couple of fears there. One, they have the fear about this terrible, you know, earthquakes and waves and things that are going to come, and that's a fear. And the other fear is of not knowing. You see, people are afraid of uncertainty. It bothers them. So here they are. They think something awful is going to happen, and I really don't know about it. Well, how does the fear of that not knowing get fixed for them? Well, they create a belief. They say, well, okay, I know what's going to happen. It's going to happen just like this, and it's going to happen, you know, these places and not those places. And suddenly they read it, or they make it up themselves, and now that fear of that uncertainty goes away, because they have a belief of how it will be, and that belief becomes their reality. And they're
sort of like the better the devil you know. Is that?
Yeah, well, you know, people who have strong beliefs are certain in those beliefs.
Yeah.
You know, go talk to a fundamentalist and see how certain they are that their beliefs are truth. Well, they are, and you get these beliefs and hold them very strongly based on how strong the fear is in you. If there's lots of fear, then you're going to have a strong belief, because you need something strong to battle that strong fear. So that's why they have that certainty. They need the certainty because they can't deal with the uncertainty. People are afraid of not knowing, and that's one of the big sources of fear, and that's one of the big sources of belief. You know, people, if they don't know whether they're going to hell or not, you know, then they will cling to a religious belief that tells them that it'll be okay.
Yeah.
Just do this and it'll be okay. You know, they will believe that with as much power and force as they do have power and force of the fear of that, you know, of that consequence.
Well, do you think this is also, excuse me, another way of avoidance or escapism from growing up? It's like, well, all these changes will happen and there'll be big changes, and, you know, we can start again or something like that.
Oh, sure. It's all sorts of things are, you know, for each person kind of has their own way of coming at it. Some people feel, well, I don't have to grow up, because when all this happens, we'll all get a free pass. You know, we'll pass go and get $200, and now we'll all be enlightened and everything. And, you know, the angels will come and we'll all sing together, and it'll be wonderful. You know, just make sure you're on the right side. You know, you're the ones that are being chosen, not the ones that are being cast down. And you have people that just personalize it, and they use it for all sorts of things to cover their fears. So there's a fear of not making it and not being good enough and being left behind, and it comes out in a belief of being part of the chosen ones, you see. So yes, they do. The people escape, people, you know, slip away from their fears and their beliefs, and they and their ego, and they use any kind of game they can to cover it up. So yeah, you're right. There's lots of things going on, and every individual is kind of driven according to their own individual fears and needs. But it turns out to be a mess. It turns out to be all these people, talking about fear and the terrible things, and then about all the wonderful things that are going to happen, but they're really afraid that those wonderful things won't happen to them, and it gets to be a lot of stress. And like you said, they do raise the probability of these things happening.
Mm-hmm. Well, what general advice would you like to give on this subject?
On the subject, it's just like we first said, don't worry about the future. Let it happen. Learn to live gracefully with uncertainty, and deal with it as it comes. That's sort of the advice in it. Just don't worry about predictions. Deal with life as it happens. Live in the present, and let the future take care of itself.
Oh, that sounds pretty good to me. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Tom, what you just said would a reasonable preparedness of living life in an environment such as this is a good thing, but it's not something that you want to base your life on. Is trying to come to an emergency bug out type situation.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, preparedness is good. And if, you get the idea that you need to move to the mountains, well, go move to the mountains. If you get the idea you need to move to the desert, go move to the desert. Do whatever you feel like you need to do, but don't let it run your life. I don't say that it's the, Pollyanna sort of thing. You should be, don't walk in the park at night, if the park has muggers in it, so you should be prepared. You should use your brain. It's not that, I just do whatever comes, so I'll walk in the park and if a mugger hits me, that'll be the way it is. That's not wise either. That's foolish. So being fearless doesn't mean being foolish. It means you don't have fear, but you still have enough sense to, apply wisdom as you can, not to set yourself into, things that are going to likely create problems for you. So yes, you can be prepared. You can do those kinds of things, but don't let it push your life around. If you don't feel that strongly about it, don't be pushed by your fear. You see? Now, if you are informed and you feel like you need to do this, well, just go do it. It's not a panic, but go do it. If it turns out it wasn't very important and you were mistaken, then learn something about how your fear created this knowing in you that really wasn't true. It'll be a good lesson for you. You see? So you can't lose if you just just live in the present moment and deal with things as they come. So be prepared. Don't walk in the park in the dark if it's a bad neighborhood, but don't be afraid of going out of your house either. See, that would be an opposite thing. Well, I can't go out of the house because there's muggers outside. Well, that's taking it to a degree that's unhealthy. But don't walk in the park at night. That's just being reasonable. Sometimes people wonder if you're fearless, then you're foolish. I need my fear to keep me safe. You don't need your fear to keep you safe. You have a brain and common sense to keep you safe. Your fear has no value to it at all.
That is such an amazing statement to hear, because there's so much of that as basis for people's activities. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the insurance company, is to seemingly, in my opinion, to assuage fear. Mm-hmm. Is there any way to deal other than individually with this mass fear phenomena? I mean, is there any way to counterbalance that type of extrusion into the world of that fearful attitude that is so prevalent amongst those who are certain of their path?
Well, it's just don't attach yourself to it is the thing, because there'll be lots of fearful people that will be telling you that the sky is either falling or about to fall soon, and that you need to do this or you need to do that. That'll have to do with your job or have to do with relationships, all kinds of things. Just don't attach to it. You can say, well, okay, perhaps, tra la 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 la. You can go on with your life, and
You
say,
may
well,
be right.
yeah, you may be right, and okay, if you're right, then maybe I should have some extra canned goods in the pantry or something like that. But I'm not gonna quit my job and go, live in a tent somewhere, wait for a great catastrophe, because I don't have a great feeling that I need to do that, and I'm not going to do it just because you're afraid and you make
Right.
me afraid. So you just don't connect to it, don't attach to it. Live your life according to the way it is. And if a big wave comes and rolls over you and everybody dies, well, okay, that's not so bad. You just go back and start again. It's just not like it's a big deal.
This is where I came in.
Yeah. So, okay, let's go. Now what are we going to do? All right, let's do something different next time. Wave got me that time, but I learned something. It's just not that big a deal. So you need to not get wrapped around the axle. Just don't give that sort of thing any of your focus, any of your attention. Just let it go. Listen to it. If it resonates with you and you feel like you need to do something, then go do it. And if it turns out it was foolish, learn something. If it turns out it wasn't foolish, hey, good for you. You just don't need to get too upset about it. Don't make it an emotional ego fear thing. Whatever you
Right.
do without fear. Do it intentionally, and just do it, and then be aware of the feedback and see what happens. Make it an educational thing. So it's not that you shouldn't, take precautions or you shouldn't do this or that. It's not that you should or shouldn't do anything in particular, but whatever you do, don't do it out of fear, and, be open to learning some, what is this going to teach you? How can you learn from this thing, what you did and how it worked out? That's how we grow.
So rather than being fear-based, it would be better to learn how to learn, to learn how to see that feedback as it pops up initially.
Sure. So then you're not afraid of it. You say, okay, I'm going to stay right here, even though, people say there's going to be a big tidal wave here, and I'll learn, whether there is or not, and what the signs were and all that sort of thing. And I don't think so, so I'm not going to worry about it. But if it does happen, then no big problem. I'll come back and, I'll maybe pay more attention next time to the signals. So you just don't take, these kinds of things with a lot of fear, with a lot of angst. Just make your decisions and then live with it. Live with the uncertainty. See, most people have trouble living with that uncertainty. But what if it's going to happen and I don't do this? Then that would be terrible. But what, and they're all wound up around this uncertainty.
Right.
Decide what you think is right for you and do it, and don't look back, and if it teaches you a lesson, then learn the lesson.
And if you happen to be involved with a group of like-minded individuals or like learning individuals, then that influence has a possibility of spreading farther than just on an individual basis, I would imagine.
Yes.
Is that where our consciousness is going?
Okay, where is our consciousness going? I think it's a kind of a question there. And theoretically and actually both, it's evolving toward love. Now, we can say that that's what we're here for, right? To evolve toward love. And theoretically, everybody can do that. And the actuality is not everybody's really making a whole lot of progress, but everybody has that potential. But it appears to me that if you look back, over the whatever we have in the written history, it appears that our consciousness was more highly developed long ago. Because, sometimes, what about the people who wrote, some of the ancient wisdom? Boy, they really knew a whole lot. We don't seem to know that much anymore. Could we have come to the conclusion? We go sit under a banyan tree and, come to the conclusions that Buddha did? How is it that these people seem to have been more spiritual? But you have to consider that was only very, very small groups. That wasn't humanity in general. That was some very, very small groups of people. And that gave us, those people doing that gave us the foundation now that we need. And we are in a process of trying to broaden from the few to the many as far as that spiritual growth. A good example, education is doing the same thing. Go back 1,000 years, and there were educated people. There were people who knew all the knowledge, a lot of the knowledge that was around, say 500-600 years ago. Very educated people, but there were very few of them, right? Only a half a percent actually were really well educated. And what are we doing here in the present time? We're trying to make that education universal. We're trying to get everybody educated up to a certain degree. And what has that done? Well, hardly anybody is educated as well as those people were a few centuries ago. The really well-educated people, they were the great, they wrote great literature, did great science, wrote great poetry, thought big thoughts. They were philosophers, they were all these things. They were really well-educated. And hardly anybody these days is nearly as educated as they were. But there's millions and millions of people who are educated much better than the average person was in those days, you see. So though we've lost some of the height at the top, we've gained tremendously with the participation at the bottom. And all in all, I think we're better off. We're much better off than we were years and years ago. So I see that we not only theoretically are evolving toward love, but we actually are. We're growing up. It just, we're doing it in a little different way now. We're spreading this idea of growing toward love has started to become more common. It becomes more rational. It makes more sense to a larger number of people, even though there may be not that many people who are really, worked themselves up to the peak yet. But there's a whole lot more people trying. There's hundreds of thousands, there's millions of seekers that take all of this very seriously. And even just 100 years ago, or maybe 50 years ago would be better. Back in the 1940s and 50s, there weren't hundreds of seekers. That wasn't as much as it is now. It's more, that's a lot more common thing. This whole New Age movement kind of been the seekers movement. And a lot of that's silly and focused on things that don't really provide much value, but still they're people seeking, even if they're caught in traps, looking at pretty crystals or something, and they're not really, going toward love. They're doing other things, but still their minds are open. They're looking for bigger pictures and they're giving it a try. And that's what's important. They will eventually get there. So I think we are doing better. I think consciousness is growing. It is evolving. It's going slow because we have, it's at the level of the masses now. It's not just the elite that are in this process. Before, just the elite were in the process and the masses were left out. We're trying to get the masses into the process, and that's a slow process. But if you have masses and they only take one small step, that adds up to a whole lot. Then one person going to the top and finding enlightenment under the banyan tree. You see, that's just one person. But if you get a billion people taking a step in the right direction, you've really helped to clean this mess up a lot by that. So that's where we are. We're in the process now of branching out and making this a community thing rather than just an individual thing. So, it's still individual. We're all growing individually, but
we're talking
sharing more. We're talking. Yeah, we're sharing. That slows it down, but it does a lot of good. It's building a foundation. So I think we're doing fine.
Do you see a potential for that type of renaissance that you were talking about with the highly educated of several hundred years ago?
I think maybe it will happen that way. And I see, the way I kind of see it happening is that in Western culture, at least, the high priests of Western culture are the scientists. Okay, the scientists would probably, want to string me up or burn me at the stake if I call them the high priests, but that's what they've become. The high priests were the people that told everybody else, that told the masses what to believe, that told the masses what was true and what wasn't. That's the job of the high priests. And now that's the job of the scientists. When the scientists say this is true, we all believe it. And when the scientists say this is foolish, nobody believes it. So I think the first shoe will fall when the high priests, the scientists, come to the conclusion that reality is virtual. That'll be the biggest paradigm shift of all, because that paradigm shift will lead to the next, which is that if it's virtual, of course, then it's informational and computational, and that consciousness is the computer. That'll be the second big shift, but that won't be nearly as big as the first one. And after that, then I think the paradigms may fall quickly, because people will say, oh, consciousness is the computer. This is a virtual reality. It doesn't take a whole lot of logic to realize that, love is the answer. So I think we may get that. And if we get that, if the high priests move in that direction, then the masses will follow. And the high priests are having a harder and harder time trying to maintain that reality is not virtual, because virtual reality just makes better physics. It solves problems. It answers questions and is just more rational. Like the round Earth is just a better, it's a better model of the Earth than a flat one. It just works better. It explains why when those ships go out to sea, they sink. They seem to sink down on the horizon. It explains things. So I think that we may come to that in near future. What does that mean? Next 100 years? Next 20? I don't know. But usually truth eventually wins out. Back when Darwin said that man descended from the apes, people laughed at him and they drew pictures of Darwin with an ape head and that kind of thing. But eventually people looked at it and said, the facts bear this out. We need to take this seriously, because that's, there's the facts do it. And it's the same with virtual reality. The facts bear it out. And sooner or later, the high priest will have to come around and take it seriously. And when they do, I think it's the first step into this quickening of people getting it and seeing that, reality is virtual. And when it's virtual, of course, what they have to say, well, then, who's the programmer? What's going on? Where's this coming from? It was virtual. And that should lead them into consciousness being the computer, which should lead them to love as the answer. And by then, they actually will become aware of what the game is. And though most will still be full of fear and full of ego, you'll have a whole lot more seekers, because suddenly they'll have a bigger picture. And that will then start progress moving ever so slowly, like a glacier. A little more quickly in the positive, direction. So I see that as we're getting close to that, because scientists, like I say, are having a harder and harder time maintaining the fiction that reality is objective and physical. That just has too many questions that can't be answered based on that model. So I'm very positive. I think this will all, we'll get there.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Thank you for making that an explicit statement in my ears.
Tom, I have one last question for you. And, I've seen probably all of your videos. And recently I watched your one from Spain. And one of the things I've noticed when you speak of your experiences in this experience package, but specifically when you spoke in the one in Spain about the virtual reality we call after death, and you were describing how you knew what happened in that virtual reality, that you were helping people go through an adjustment process. What struck me was in that moment was I couldn't see you attached to an identity. There was a detachment, a non-clinging to an identity. You were just another experience packet having conscious experiences. So my question is, what's enabled you to do that?
Well, it's been a long, what do they say? It's been a long, I've gotten there slowly, and a lot of things kind of clicked, and a lot of aha moments came by. But one of the things that enabled me to do that is, I came here to do this, and I didn't, start as a new consciousness on this time, and so I kind of came here prepared for this, and it was kind of laid out, and I was nudged and pushed to find myself in learning situations. But there were a lot of aha moments, and when I read this question, I started thinking about it. I found it ended up being my favorite question. And I thought, what are all these breakthroughs? What are the things that kind of made a difference, made me kind of do aha, and maybe move in a different direction? And as I thought about them, I kind of thought from the beginning out, kind of moving through time and collecting these. And I'm sure I missed bunches of them and that sort of thing. But, so I made a list, and I've got this list of breakthroughs or aha moments that I'd like to share with you.
Please.
The first one, and again, there's a sort of chronological order, but not necessarily exact chronological order. The first thing that kind of that hit me was that you have to let understanding and value flow to you as a result of fixing yourself. If you chase it with your intellect, you're unlikely to find it. Now, we did talk about that today in one of those other questions, but that was kind of a fundamental thing, because I started out, I'm a left brainer, I'm a scientist, so I got to, do what I have to do to, to make this happen. And I realized that it's not the doing that's important, it's the being. You can let the value come to you. All you have to do is fix yourself, and the value will find you. If you chase it, you're unlikely to find it. The second thing is that information about physical objects or being exists independently of those objects or beings, and is usually available. It's like open source. I first got to that early on when I first started to see auras and energy, and that just happened to me one day. And my friend Dennis came to me after probably only a week after I first saw doing it. He showed me a photograph, and he said, well, look at this photograph, and tell me, there's like 5 people there. One of them is a psychic and a sort of kind of renowned psychic, and the others aren't. Tell me which one's the psychic. And I said, well, okay, how am I supposed to do that? And he says, well, you can see auras. And I'm thinking, I can see them in a picture? I've only seen them around people. And well, maybe, let's see. So I looked at the picture, and sure enough, I could see all the auras in the pictures of everybody there. And I thought, well, that's neat. Evidently, auras don't have anything to do with bodies. You see, it's just data that I can access. So that was kind of an aha moment. And then I realized that the source is open. I mean, anybody can look at anybody's aura anytime they want. You don't have to have a body in front of you. It's just data in a database that you're doing. So that was kind of an aha, so I could tell that I could look at a picture. And then I said, well, if I can see it in a picture, do I need a picture? And no, I didn't need a picture. All I need to do is have an address or, a name, something that differentiated an individual, and there was their aura. And I could get information about them without pictures, without a lock of hair, without any kind of physical thing at all. I didn't even have to know who they were. It could be, take a look at the aura of Mr. X. As long as somebody knew who Mr. X was, that I could make a unique identification, you see. So that was a big aha moment. Next was that the non-physical reality does not have to be foggy. And this was a big one. Nor do you have to sneak up on it or ease into it with a process or a ritual. No transition process is required. I'd be lying there in these waterbed in the Monroe laboratory that Dennis and I were working in, and I would kind of go into this meditation state. And in the meditation state, I thought that the foggier it was, the better it was, right? If you kind of got out of this physical reality and got into the fog where the physical reality didn't exist, then that was good. But then I found out that that wasn't good, because you were in the fog. You couldn't see anything while you're in the fog. Everything was foggy. Things weren't that clear. And then I just cleared away the fog, and here I was, crystal clear in some other reality frame. And I could also be crystal clear in this reality frame. I didn't have to lose this reality frame or an awareness of it to be clear in the other reality frame. And that was a big aha moment. You don't have to go through the fog. It's like, well, I'm going to get deeper and deeper. Well, what deeper means is less and less attached to this reality and foggier and foggier to where you get so deep that you're just barely conscious. And then guess what? You never do anything because you're just barely conscious. You're kind of limited. You're kind of limited in what you can do because you're only marginally conscious. But somehow we think that we have to get there by going through foggy, and we don't. You can just clear the fog, wake up, and say, okay, here I am wide awake, and I'm in this other reality frame. Now everything is clear, just like you're wide awake. And you say, yeah, but I'm still perfectly aware that I'm in this physical reality frame. Well, that's okay too. Mm-hmm. You can do both. And that was a big, I don't need to do all that process, because I was doing process. Oh, I lie down. Then you take a few deep breaths, and then you relax your toes, and then you relax your feet, and then you relax all your body parts till you get up to your head, and then you relax that, and then you do this. And it was this whole relaxation, meditation ritual, and making this transition from physical reality through the fog to another reality, and all of that was unnecessary. All I had to do is shift my focus, and within 1/10 of a second, I was there, perfectly clear, no process, no ritual, no relaxation. Didn't even have to be in a quiet place. I didn't have to be lying down. I could be standing on one foot, hopping through the park. It doesn't matter. And it's just a matter of making a change in your data stream. So that was a big aha moment. Suddenly, everything cleared. Okay, the next one was the history database is populated by probabilistic models without free will. So you can go into the history database and you can see your, great-great-great-grandfather or whoever you were in the lifetime, last, or this other stuff. But it's just probabilistic models. There's no free will. You, though, here in this life, you're really a probabilistic model, except you have a free will. You can make these decisions. That's what makes you conscious. All of the other things, they're just working on probability. Now, they're very good models, and unless you do some careful research, you'll never find that out. But I did. I went to these databases, and my first thing is, well, I can go in here and I can change something, and then I can follow how the change changes things that happen. So I'd go in, I'd change something, and I'd see what happened. What were the results? You could go to somebody and say, your mother was a dog, and he would react and get mad and do things. And I've changed things now. I've made somebody angry who wasn't angry before. So that's a change. And then you can see how all that played out. And then you could come back again. Same place, same people, same change. You get the same result. Well, I did that in 100 different ways, and I said, something fishy about this, and realized that all these people I were interacting with, even though it was real life, just like you were there with them and they were real and you could carry on conversations, but if you put in a stimulus, you'd always get the same. If you put the stimulus in it the same way, you'd always get the same response. And then I realized that you could affect the response with your intent. You can say, well, with the default version of this is, I want everything to happen in my interaction here with the highest probability. So everybody will react to me in the most likely way that they would have reacted. That's the default value, and that's what you get, and that's what kept repeating itself. But you can go in and explore other things and say, well, I don't want everybody to react at the highest probability. I want everybody to react by their 10th highest probability, or by something else, and now you'll get a bunch of different reactions. So then's when I learned it was just models. And after I learned that was a model, I realized we're really not any different. We are just like that, except we have free will to make choices because we are, evolving. And the rest of it's just data. It's just history. So yes, you can go to past lives. Yes, you can go back in the database, both the one that has actually happened or the ones that didn't happen but could have. And you can go into those too. I sometimes say, you can go back and say, well, what would the world be like if Hitler had won World War II? And then you can go back into that and see. Now you're not following the most likely thing. You're following something else. And then it became just a database, a place that you could play and do what if analysis and realize that here we are. The only difference we have with a person in that database is that we have free will. We can make choices, they don't. And that was a big aha moment. A lot of things fell into place. The next one I have here is that consciousness is the only active ingredient. The rest is belief, ritual, or tools. And that's when I was healing. And I found out that, okay, we use these light bars, light beam energy tools that Bob had us, make in this tape, and we'd direct the white energy to heal the things with these energy tools. And since we just kind of made those up, it occurred to me that there's nothing fundamental about this white light or the energy tool or anything else. First, I thought that the tool, the bar, was made up, and that wasn't fundamental, but certainly the white light was. Light is like a basic thing. And then I learned that no, the white light's just another metaphor. It's just a tool that we use for focusing our intent, and that conscious intent is the only active ingredient. Everything else is a belief or a ritual. So if we're into Reiki, then we have symbols and things that we use and structures that we apply, and these work. They're tools. They help focus our intent, and focusing our intent is the active ingredient. So if you're forecasting the stars, then it's the same sort of thing. You make an interpretation of all this complex stuff, and the interpretation turns out to be your intent getting data out of the database, but you use this tool to help you focus. You see, or whatever. You throw the chicken bones on the ground and you can read the future by throwing these chicken bones down or dropping the sticks in the I Ching or whatever. And it's basically you're getting intent, you're interacting with the larger consciousness system, and you're using this tool to help you interact. So I realized that most everything that I was using and doing, and all of the things that, the techniques I was using were all just rituals and tools. They weren't fundamental. Next came, for the most part, you create your own personal reality, and we create our own collective reality as well. And we talked about this later. What you see out there in the world is what we are. Okay, so what you are. This is the key. What you are drives what you do. You see, the being precedes is more fundamental than the doing, the acting. Yeah. The being level is more fundamental than the intellectual level. So the fundamental thing that's important is what you are. That's what you have to work on, not what you do. So learning a new ritual, learning a new process, going through the motions of doing different things, that's just tools. And the tools may be very useful, but if the tool doesn't help you change what you are, then the tool isn't useful. Find the tools that work for you and don't worry about the ones that don't. You see, it's not like, oh, this guy has the tools, we have to do it his way. That's his tools. You need to develop your own tools. Next was you must take full responsibility for your present quality of consciousness. It is precisely what you've made it. So here we are, and you say, well, I'd like to do this. I'd like to, be able to have these abilities or do these things or act this way or get rid of my fear. But you have to take full responsibility for it. You are exactly and precisely the way you have made yourself. Through all the choices that you have made to this point, that's you. So take responsibility for it. It's not that you had a bad teacher. It's not that you didn't get a fair chance. It's not that you were born poor or destitute or with one leg. That's not it. It's that, it's what you've made it. You need to make more of it. Next was there are very few free handouts given by the larger consciousness system. You have to earn your way with change at the being level. Doing, wishing, wanting, and expecting are all marginal value. And if you cannot convert them into change at the being level, they're useless. In fact, they are negative. They get in the way because they keep you focused in ways that are non-productive. Next was, for the most part, you get what you need and what you deserve. And by what you deserve, I don't mean like punishment, but what you have earned. Okay, so for the most part, you get what you need and what you've earned. So if what you really need is somebody to hit you between the eyes with a 2x4 to get your attention, that's what you get. And if you don't need that, if you can grow without pain, then you don't get pain. So you get what you need and what you've earned, what you've deserved. So as things happen to you in general throughout your life, you kind of keep that in mind that, well, if that happened to you, that's probably what you needed and what you've earned. That there it is. So, and you tend to get it just as you need it and or deserve it. So it is applied right at that point where you have optimal chance to turn that challenge into growth. And that's when it comes to you. The next one was control is an illusion. You have the most control over your life and events when you give up trying to control or manipulating anything. Life unfolds perfectly for you if you stop letting your fear, ego, and beliefs interfere with the natural unfolding process. Harmony is the natural state of things. Just get out of the way with your fear, ego, expectations, beliefs, etc., and let it happen. And that was a real eye-opener and aha, too. Of course, all of us go through life trying to manipulate it and control it to be the way we want it. That's called being smart, right? You negotiate and move things and finagle and whatever to be the way you think it ought to be. And when you just live in the moment, live in the present, and just be and try to be better and be love, and just let everything else go. Don't try to control anything. Suddenly, everything happens just the way you'd like it to. It all starts to fall in, and here you are not trying to manipulate anything, and it all just falls at your feet. It's really amazing, and it's until that really happens to you, it's hard to believe that it works that way, but it does. When you give up trying to control or manipulate things, it's almost like you had complete control of everything, but you don't really. It just appears that way. You're not controlling anything. Everything just falls out just the way you need it and want it. Of course, like we said, that's by definition, because what you need and want are great opportunities to grow up. And whether that means you stumbled and fell on your face, great. You learned something, you see. So everything is just terrific. Next was most everyone is doing the best they can practically, not theoretically. Theoretically, they could do a lot better, but they're doing what they can practically with the tools and abilities they have. Thus, we're all in the same boat, struggling with our respective challenges, and accordingly, we should treat each other with love and compassion rather than anger, frustration, or condescension. And I learned this some decades ago when I was driving my car around, and there was always these idiots on the road with me, you see. And I would always be talking to the idiots. Come on, idiot, it's time to put your foot on the gas now, don't you think? That light's been green for a minute or two, and that sort of thing. And then I realized that that's really not very helpful. It's not helping me. It's not helping them. And if it's not helpful, let's let it go. And I realized that all these people are just doing the best they can. Everybody's allowed to drive a car, whether they're really, good drivers or not. Old people, young people, confused people, people who are focused on other things, people who are distracted. They're all allowed to be out there with the car, and you just need to get along with them as best you can. Give them a wide berth if you must, just realize that they're all just trying to wrestle with their own challenges, and don't become part of their problem. Don't let them become a problem for you. If they are a problem for you, that's your problem, not theirs, you see. So my being frustrated with them was my problem. It wasn't their problem. It wasn't that they were being silly, changing lanes, weren't using their turn signals, doing all this stuff, cutting me off, running me off the side of the road. That wasn't the problem. My problem was getting angry, getting upset and frustrated by it. So I had to change me, not them. Okay, the next thing is that growing up is not about doing, it's about being. Growth must be at the being level rather than intellectual level. Next was the way the consciousness evolution game works is that stuff happens, and we get to choose how we deal with it. We evolve or de-evolve according to that choice. And the next was physical reality is an illusion. All is consciousness. Physical reality is an evolving digital simulation that produces the constraints that individuated units of consciousness players like us must follow. So that means that, this physical game that we're in is a digital simulation, and all that digital simulation does is provide constraints. So our brain doesn't process anything. Our brain doesn't remember anything. Our brain sets the limits on what we can process and what we can remember. So the brain is a constraint, and that's a constraint of the simulation that has evolved to be this universe, and then specifically this planet with these species, on this planet. So all of that is evolution, and we're just consciousness playing in this game. Our bodies are like our avatar, and the game, the rule set, which is the physics and the science and the biology and all that, that's the rule set, and the rule set sets constraints on what we can do. So we can't jump 20 feet in the air because the rule set says we're too heavy, our leg muscles are too small, and whatever. We're not made for jumping 20 feet in the air, so it can't happen because the rule set. You see, so our life here, the things we do, we can't learn quantum mechanics and differential equations all in 5 minutes because our brains just don't function that way. Somebody hits us over the head and gives us brain damage, we change our personalities or we lose information, whatever. Our brain's damaged. It's not that our brain, isn't functioning anymore. It's that the rule set says that when you've got this big hole in your brain, there's things that you can't do now that you used to be able to do. It's just up to the rule set, you see. So I realized that physical reality was an illusion, and then I understood how it worked, that this illusion worked. And the last and final thing, I know you thought this list was never going to end, but the last and final thing is that physics, metaphysics, ethics, morality, and theology follow the same rules and are derived from the same basic understanding. We can derive all of those from first principles with just 2 assumptions. So they all interact. They all, what can we say? They all are, integrated into just one understanding. You can drive all of them, physics and metaphysics both. And that only occurred probably, I don't know, 5 or 6, 7, 8 years ago. And that kind of hit me that was all together. So these go from back in the early 70s right up to, probably the end of the mid 2000s. So that's my list.
First of
Wow.
all,
What a list.
I want to say I was hoping your list wouldn't end, but I have a sneaking suspicion it won't after all.
No, I agree with you. I don't think it'll ever end. I expect there'll be more breakthroughs as time goes on. That's the whole point of being here, is just letting it go and learning from it. But it was fun actually going through this list and kind of going through the last 40 years and trying to pick the things that were kind of the things where you turn a corner, where you suddenly see life and reality in a different view. So those were mine. Let's see, there were 15 of them. That's it's my list of 15 breakthroughs. So I hope people find that useful. I found it useful.
Are you kidding?
I had a good time.
This is so profound, Tom. I hope you are aware of what you've just done in sharing with us what you've just shared. And I've been just sitting here in tears and vibrating and resonating, and I'm judging, knowing the other people here, I'm sure they feel the same, and I'd like them to say something too about that if they would.
It was just a darn good question.
Well, that was Mac's question, actually. So
yeah, it's just a really good question.
We're very happy that you had the opportunity to share that list with us, Tom. I'm going to go back and listen to that section of this interview over and over and over again. It's kind of rhetorical, redundant to ask one final question. Is there anything more that you'd like to say or conclude? Any key points? Or I think we probably just got it.
Yeah, well, I guess the only key point is don't get frustrated. This is some people say, oh yeah, that sounds good. I want to be that way. I want to do that. And just realize it's a long process. I've been doing this a very long time, and I didn't jump to all these conclusions one day, and they didn't all come to me in a dream. You just have to start from wherever you are and take one step at a time. What's that? The 1,000-mile journey begins with one step, right? And if you think of it like that, make it a long-term process. This is a work of a lifetime, or maybe a work of many lifetimes. And you have to think of it like that, and don't get discouraged because you've tried, and this is for I know you guys are already are meditators and you've been seekers for a long time, but you have a lot of people out there who try to meditate for the first time, and in 2 or 3 weeks it doesn't work for them, so they quit. Just keep going. It will get there. If you have a desire to get there, you will get there. You just have to pay attention and just take one step after another and just let it happen. Don't try to make it happen. Just let it happen. So it's really easier than it sounds. It sounds really difficult, and people make like out of body and all these things to be really difficult. They're hard things to do. They work at it for years and they have marginal success. It's because they're working at it so hard. If they just let go of all the beliefs and expectations and let it happen, it would be a lot easier for it to happen. We tend to get in our way by working at goals through the intellect. So I'd say if all these things seem like it's a whole lot, well, it's a lifetime of thinking about it, and everybody can do what I have done. I'm not that special. You just have to keep after it, and you'll all get there.
Well, Tom, as you were going through your list, I had earlier written out a question to ask. Did you have bleed-throughs between reality frames? And as you were talking about your list, I was having such vivid echoings of my experience on some of those points that you touched. And it was just an amazing feeling. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you.
Very welcome. I appreciate the opportunity of being able to speak, and hopefully there'll be lots of listeners out there who will learn something that's valuable to them.
If they can't learn anything from this conversation, they're not being open to the opportunity to learn something from this conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks again, Tom. We have been speaking with Tom Campbell, the author of My Big Toe. Tom's websites are mybigtoe.com and mbtevents.com. Thank you for sharing your time and thoughts with us again. We hope the listeners have gained further insights into the aspects of Tom's theory that we've been discussing, and we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Consciousness is a topic of such expansive scope, we've only touched upon a few areas, including Tom's closing list. The larger reality cannot be adequately described and discussed in the limited time that we've had available today, yet we're very thankful for the time that has been shared with us. At Time Monk Radio, we're forward-looking and hope to anticipate the future, although we'll just accept it as it comes along, so we may be better prepared for its arrival. While the past is important, we'll leave that to historians as long as we're not dragging our baggage along with us. And the lessons have been learned. On behalf of Fox and all the members of Time Monk Radio Forum, thank you, Tom.
Thank you.